which probably is. Yeah, well, it's working on YouTube, which is what I really care about. Cool. Okay, let's transition in. Okay. So yeah, welcome Kafka to the stream, and hopefully today will be the first of many debates and discussions. And I think today will be pretty relaxed in terms of what we have to talk about in our disagreements. Hopefully, we're still friends after this.
No, I appreciate you letting me on and coming by to talk. We've been hypothesizing that we could do this at some point in the future, and we finally got around to it.
Yeah, exactly, and better late than never. And yeah, I think it's quite an interesting topic. So both Kafka and I are writers for the Pragmatic Papers, a newsletter that was founded by Destiny. And yeah, I must be honest, I was a little bit surprised when I heard that Kafka is a Christian, which is probably my own prejudice coming out there. But I'm not. I mean, I've put in the title that I'm an atheist, but ultimately, ultimately, I'm somewhere around agnostic atheist. It depends who I'm talking to. So I don't believe that, depending on what notion of God you have, that there is no God of any form. But in terms of what most people mean by God, I think is vanishingly unlikely, and therefore I'd call myself an atheist. So perhaps a bit later in the discussion, I'll go into more detail about what I think is and isn't possible. But yeah, where do you stand, Kafka? So what are your beliefs roundabout?
So kind of generally, I'm a Christian, and within that, I'm an Episcopalian. And so those both have a lot of things tied up in them that people can assign a lot of beliefs to me with. I would say that really, I don't view either of those titles as kind of requiring me to have strict dogmatic beliefs around my religion. It's just they're kind of more just categories that I would more easily fit into than other categories. So while I call myself a Christian and I call myself an Episcopalian, it's very much a self-ID situation where I don't know what standard I would have in place to like say whether or not I'm allowed to call myself that. That's just how I kind of identify my religion, and it's kind of an easy way for people to roughly understand my beliefs without us having a huge conversation about them, so they can know every little thing, right? So
okay, but I mean, actually, I must be honest, maybe some of the audience are also ignorant of this, but what's an Episcopalian? Did you describe yourself as?
Episcopalian, yeah. So that's it's essentially an Anglican. So we are, our church is based from the Church of England. That was started way back when. It was one of the first breaks away from the Catholic Church. And so a whole lot of things that go into it, but a lot of ways that people like to describe it is some people like to describe it as Catholic light, because we still have very traditional services if you want to go to them. So there's a lot of kneeling, standing, hymns, and things like that. We are, however, incredibly liberal compared to a lot of other Christian faiths in America. So we also often get called very somewhat derogatory names by more conservative Christian faiths. We get kind of considered to be kind of like the hippies or liberals, stuff like that. And also I think that they're some of the most like a very big goal explicitly by Episcopalians is to not be offensive, is to kind of be accepting, open, and try not to offend, whether that's your own people or people outside. And so we can come across a little soy in that way, but ultimately, we believe in Jesus Christ. We believe in God. We believe that, Jesus died for our sins, came back from the dead, that stuff, right? Generally, if you think of like a normal Christian belief, Episcopalians generally fall into those categories. You might have slight variations, but there's nothing really outside the mean when it comes to Christian faith. There's really strict arguments you could have around specific like dogma, traditions, things like that I'm not particularly interested in, that some other people might be. But it'd be hard to find like a truly foundational belief that I think a Episcopalian would have, differing from a Catholic or a Baptist or a Methodist, in my view. I think
okay,
ultimately
but
they all easily.
But if you're stemming from the Anglican Church and you are a former Protestant, right? It was post-Reformation.
No, I've always been Episcopalian.
No, but my point is like
I'm sorry. I see.
in Europe we had the
Go ahead.
Reformation, right, which was really taking away the power of the Vatican and of this kind of hierarchical system of leadership of the church. And it related to a lot of other things. So in Germany, the form of Protestantism they have here is Lutheranism. And you're suggesting you're from your offshoot comes from the Anglican Church. So what I've noticed the differences between churches in Germany and the UK is that the UK is far more extreme. So they whitewash their churches, and the whole idea was like bare minimum, no luxury. It so borders on kind of like the communism of Christianity in the sense of everyone's equal. You can't buy your way to heaven, which was something in the Catholic Church at the time. And there's absolutely no luxury in the churches. Whereas the Protestant churches in Germany, there's still a bit more glitz than I'm used to in the UK churches. So when all these Protestant churches fragmented away after the Reformation from the Catholic Church, they all had different flavors. So that was started by Luther. I'm actually in one of the cities that he was famous for.
That's cool.
In Eastern Germany. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. He was also a raging anti-Semite, so he wasn't all good. But his version of the Bible spread around Europe, and it became this kind of illegal thing, illegal scripture, because it was really going against the Catholic Church to do this. And eventually that led to the Bible, of course, being written in English and reading this in English, which was a big thing. And that was where the Anglican Church originated. But I'm assuming that your offshoot, even though it seems to have something tied in with the Catholicism, it's just because it's probably the earlier Anglican Church still remaining in your church. Could it be seen this way? Do you think am I interpreting it correctly?
Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, it. You know, my church history is not great, and I'm going to be honest. The kind of delineation between the denominations to me is largely like kind of a cultural thing in my view. I don't particularly. Um, it's kind of a thing where like it. I like church in the sense that it provides community, but I don't like get any kind of spiritual or religious nourishment from going to church. Like I don't connect to my religion through my church. It's a community thing for me, and it's a way for me to be around people that I feel like share a lot of the ethics and values that I have, and being able to interact with them. And I think that kind of community does nourish me spiritually in some ways. But like the actual action of like reading the Bible with people, listening to a sermon, or singing songs and stuff like that, that's not a huge central part of my faith or like my beliefs. It's kind of it's like an adjacent thing to it, right? But I would say that like whenever I look at those kind of traditional, kind of like similarities to Catholicism, it comes a lot from just kind of the fact that the Anglicanism is a government created religion by the state of England, and the only template they had was Catholicism, and people do actually like this liturgical kind of very traditional setting. I actually really enjoy it. I really enjoy the traditional services quite a lot. There's a lot of like, and a lot of intentionality. I'm an attorney when I'm not cartoon cockroach online. And there's an interesting discussion that everybody has in law school at some point where they say, why do we still sign things or notarize things like this? Why do we still use these weird words? Why do we do this way? And the reason is not because they have actual meaning themselves, but because it shows an intentionality. You would not have signed this document in front of a notary unless you really meant it. You wouldn't have used these words this specific way unless you meant it. And if we all do it that way, it's showing an intentionality. And so I think that those traditions and things like that, it's saying, hey, look, we are intending to do this. It's not just to get together to have fun. We show our intent. We want to do this thing. I think there's value in that. But, I mean, like, at the same time, right now, my daughter is very young. And so we don't actually go to the liturgical traditional service. Our church has like a really fun, cool service for parents to bring their children to, and it's a very child-focused one. It's very modern. There's still some aspects that are liturgical, but it's very modern. There's like a band on stage playing music, and they have hand signs for the prayers and the songs, and we do a big parade every time we go to read from the Bible, so the kids get to feel like they're part of it. And there's also a lot less strict rules, so you'll even see kids running around the room or playing games or doing things in there. because it's kind of an understanding of like, look, like we're here to do this together, and if you want to do that traditional stuff, it's there. But also, some people, their lives don't let them do that, or some people maybe that's just not how they want to engage with it. And instead of telling those people go find a different church,
Mm.
they said no, like we want to build a community for as many people as possible.
I
And
mean,
so
I mean,
I really respect that about my church.
there's a lot of overlap of that, and I'm fairly ignorant about churches because as a child I'd been to just as many Gurdwaras, which is a Sikh temple, as I think I had been to a church. The only reason I started going to
I
a
love
church,
Sikhism.
yeah, well, the food is amazing there as well, because
That's
they
fair.
serve you food in the Gurdwara. But I started going to a church because I was in a choir and I enjoyed the singing. So that's my relationship with Christianity. My father was a lapsed Catholic. My mother,
Mm.
very much an atheist. I think more so than myself. Um, but from what I've seen of the Anglican Church and what you've just described, sounds incredibly strong overlap. So I'm going to kind of assume and imagine that your community and practice is somewhat in line with the Anglican Church, but then I have to start asking about things like homosexuality. So, in your strand of Christianity, could you be a homosexual priest, for example? Is that possible?
Yeah, we have homosexual priests.
Yeah. Okay. So it's the
And
same.
there's
Okay.
no what and when it comes to homosexuality, as far as I understand, I know at my church and at I think just about every Episcopal church I've been to in America, it's really not an issue of this kind of like this discussion around it being a sin and things like that is really not a part of Episcopalian doctrine. Specifically, if you remember, there's a very big controversy of a priest praying for Donald in front of Donald Trump for LGBT children, and I believe that wasn't an Episcopalian priest; it was a woman,
Mm-hmm.
and she prayed like that in front of him because it's there's a really big. I can remember maybe a decade, maybe a little more, there was a really big discussion in a lot of churches about it. And for the most part, Episcopalian churches said there are brothers and sisters. If people want to say that it's a sin, they can say that. We're not going to talk. We're not going to say it that way. And I think that's kind of a general outward facing view. And then if you want to actually discuss and like go into it, I think
Mm.
there's a lot of very strong arguments for why it's totally acceptable for a Christian to not view homosexuality as a sin. I don't think it's contradictory or any kind of like uh, way that would cut against your beliefs. And it doesn't. If you wanted to, for me, being a Christian, and not viewing homosexuality as a sin, um, I've really not ever come into a time in which like it made me feel like I had to question my faith or like I really like looked at the Bible and was upset what I found there or like that I needed to change what I was reading there. Right. I feel like that's what a lot of people whenever they kind of have this discussion around homosexuality in the church, they're kind of like, oh, you're just going to change what you believe or change what the Bible says in your mind so that you don't have to confront a paradox or like an unethical thing that you
Well,
find in the Bible. And
that's where I push back a little bit. I mean, do you think there is, if you wanted to play devil's advocate in Christianity, do you not think that there's any space to interpret homosexuality as a sin? I mean,
oh yeah, there is.
yeah.
I think there's plenty of room to interpret it that way, but I think there's plenty of room to interpret it that it isn't. Like it, I don't think that homosexuality is a hugely central topic in the Bible, and the times whenever it comes up, I would say that are incredibly specific. And I can in college I learned how to read ancient Greek, and so I've read the Bible in Greek, and I've read about the words used and the
Hmm.
context in which they're used, and it's very hard for me to see it as a kind of blanket condemnation of homosexuality as we understand it in the modern day. It really, I have a hard time bridging that gap in how kind of the practice, as it was done back then, how the people writing about it were engaging with the concept of homosexuality,
Hmm.
and then comparing that to what our modern understanding of it is. I just don't see the overlap such that I would say that homosexuality is a sin that needs to be condemned, right?
Okay, but wait,
And it's also just such.
I mean,
Uh,
you mentioned two things here that aren't exactly the same. So one thing you said was that homosexuality is discussed as a big part of the Bible and therefore of the faith. Which okay, fair enough, but that doesn't mean to say that it isn't mentioned at least briefly, right? So what passages
sure.
are mentioned? What passages, shall we say, mentions homosexuality briefly that could be construed as suggesting homosexuality is a sin?
So I believe there's a part of Romans, and there's going to be someone that's going to find it better than me. I personally I don't partake in the practice of like memorizing the Bible or memorizing verses in the Bible. I don't really like that practice. I think that practice lends itself to bad interpretations and a misuse of the word. So I'm not going to be, if I'm happy to in the future, if we have another conversation, bring some citations for that kind of stuff.
I mean, I've got a
But I believe
citation.
there's a part in Romans.
I've got the citation here. So it's
Yeah,
from Leviticus, right? Forgive me, I'm terrible.
Leviticus.
Yeah, Leviticus.
That's fine.
Sorry. If a man, this is of course, it's been translated approximately 6 times from the original Aramaic language, right? So, as you're pointing out, there's vagueness
Well,
in
no,
this.
Leviticus would have been actually written in the original Hebrew and would have been a
Mhm.
transliteration of an oral tradition.
Well, that's what I'm
So
saying.
it would
Yeah.
have been into Hebrew, right?
I
Go ahead.
think in America you call this what the telephone game. I mean, I call it this Chinese whispers, where you have
Right.
said multiple times, and
Yeah.
so
Which, by the way, we should call it Chinese whispers because holy shit, is that a funnier way to say it? But go ahead.
Yeah, okay. So I'll quote this form that's in English. If a man lies with a
Sure.
man as with a woman, right? So in I assume any
Yeah.
way, right? Both of them have committed an abomination. They shall surely be put to death.
Sure.
So how can I interpret this, or is it just that the translation has completely lost the original meaning?
No, I think the person that wrote that meant that, right? To some degree, whatever their original, there's some original version where let's agree. I think, how about we stipulate this?
Hmm.
That passage is saying, don't have gay sex, right?
Hmm.
I think we can, like,
Yeah.
whatever the flowery language was, the person that wrote it didn't want the people that read it to have gay sex,
Hmm.
right?
And
Okay.
suggesting death is it should be the punishment as well.
Sure.
So that's a
Sure.
pretty bad sin. It's not like you're being a little bit naughty. You told a fib. Sounds like a very very serious sin.
Sure. No, yeah, I agree. However, I would come at this from like two angles. Okay. One, Leviticus is in the Old Testament. And for me, I think the Old Testament is important, but I don't think it is like central to my beliefs. I think that the Old Testament is a kind of preface to the New Testament, obviously,
Hmm.
uh, and shows us how we got to where we are. But I don't think that the Old Testament is a book that is particularly instructive to me in my faith. I think that there's things you can learn from it, but I don't
Hmm.
think it is something that is like I'm going to adhere to. I think it's what came before what my current faith is and what led up to. It shows me how we got there. I've got a lot of opinions about the Old Testament
Mm.
that I don't think I'm going to get into right now just because it's not super related to this topic, but like I have a very holistic and specific understanding of the Old Testament that
Mm.
for me at the very end of it results in me saying it's here, it's useful, but it is not something that if I don't adhere to the Old Testament, I don't think that that compromises my faith.
Okay,
Now, that's
how can you have that? Because it's like you're getting to pick and choose. I mean, the Bible is a religious scripture that it's held in high esteem in Christianity, right? Um,
sure.
it's kind of the kernel of it. So to cherry pick which parts seem to make sense. I mean, there's no sense in which the New Testament is the
Well, well, one second.
supreme in a sense, right? I mean, it's an interpretation,
But it's very rare for the Bible to make sense. It's very rare to read the Bible and say, I know exactly what this means. I know exactly the application for what I read. I mean, the Bible was written and intentionally written in ways that require interpretation. Okay. No
Mm.
matter what you're like, it's very rare for you to find parts of the Bible in which interpretation is not required. And so we can call it cherry picking if we like. That's fine. And okay, that's fine. But that's what interpretation is. No matter what you're doing, you're going to be interpreting it and reading it. And to me, I would rather just say yes, I do that than try to act like I don't. There are
Hmm.
parts of the Bible that to me are more important to my faith than others, right?
Hmm.
I would say that also the way that I'm doing that is not saying what makes me feel good about myself and what makes me feel bad about myself. It's me taking multiple ways of reviewing it. You said that the Bible is a religious document. I think you're right. But I think it's also a historical document. I think it's a
Hmm.
civic document. I think it's a legal document. I think it's a literary document. And every single one of those has a way of interpreting what I'm reading. And I can say, okay, how am I reading this? How is this being written and applied? Because these were written by men. And I can say, okay, how is this person writing it? Who are they writing it to? What is their purpose in writing
Mm.
it? Right. So Leviticus is specifically a book that is talking to the priests, the Levites, okay, the priests of the Jewish religion at the time, and it's saying, here are these rules, okay, that are happening in our Jewish religion in this area, in this type of government that we have, the type of society we have, okay, and why would they say that? Why would they say you shouldn't have gay sex? Okay,
Well,
now,
exactly.
is it because
So, I
yeah,
mean,
right. So this question is there, and to me, I don't take the opinion that the Bible is merely God's word and whatever it says you have to do. I take it as this was written by people that probably believe in the same God as me, that are trying to achieve his ends, that are trying to achieve some better for the people around them. Now, why would a person say this, you shouldn't have gay sex? And there's a lot of actually pretty good reasons back in the day why they didn't want to have their people having gay sex. Now, part of it is going to be something that we might refer to as like bigotry, of just kind of it's not right, or this kind of natural law idea that might exist back then. But also, like, you can see in other cultures at the time that other cultures discouraged homosexuality, and it was and some of them weren't to putting them to death, but a lot of them were doing it to have severe punishments. And it largely revolved around the fact that gay men and gay women didn't have children. And at the time that was written, we're talking about a tribal society, a stateless tribal society that needs to have more people to survive. And if you are gay, you're not creating more people. In Sparta, for example, you would have men that would go out and they would join their different military groups, and they would have sex with each other, and a lot of them, they would continue to do that, and they wouldn't get wives. And if that happened, they would be punished. And it was interesting, the way they would do it is they would bring those men, they would drag them into these ceremonies, and they would have them dance. And they'd have them dance for days and days and days and days, and you would do it until exhaustion and you collapse. And they would keep doing that and punishing these men to do that until finally they took a wife, right?
But I mean, homosexuality, at least in biology and in nature, is pretty pervasive and serves a purpose. It actually improves. You want a few more adults around as basically backup parents, and so the argument is homosexuality leads to an evolutionary advantage in this regards. And of course, those people who are homosexual will have brothers and sisters, and so their genetics are passed on through the carrying of children. So there's
and you're making an argument for why right now I do not see a value in that piece of text from Leviticus, right? The society that I exist in right now is not harmed by homosexuality, and it's not, and I can know it through what you just said, and I can know it by knowing gay people. I can see the happiness that they have, and the lives they fulfill, and how they contribute. But back then, at that time, and this isn't me saying like they were correct, but there were reasons in their minds to do that for specific material reasons. And I can say, okay, I think that's why they wrote that there. I genuinely do not think there is they can call it an abomination if they want. They can use the language they want because of the severity that they want to apply to it. But I don't see how this is an abominable sin today. I don't see where it comes from, because my understanding of sin now is not only derived from the written specific laws in the Old Testament. There's a deep discussion and understanding of sin that comes from the New Testament that has far more to do with a person's internal identity and intention and their expression of that, that does not agree, in my opinion.
Okay, but Kafka, I have to interrupt, because what you're saying, I mean, firstly, that these are two different things, of course. There's firstly the interpretation of what was meant at the time, and we're both agreeing that the interpretation is not what either of us agree with. But the difference is that I read the Bible predominantly as a philosophical text. Because for me, I don't believe in a Christian God, but I believe these people have some ideas.
Well, one second. Quickly, real quick. One question on that.
Okay.
Do you think the person writing those rules in Leviticus were writing it as a philosophical text?
Yes. I think they well,
okay.
I mean, I think that what they intended it to be. I mean, there wasn't a notion of philosophy in those days as we have today, right? So philosophy was more all-encompassing. It was basically all of academia. So in a sense, I mean, they may not call themselves philosophers, but that doesn't mean to say they're not doing philosophy, right? Because they're writing about ethics, what good and bad is. So in a sense, it's all inevitably.
Do you think that the predominant reason they wrote that was a philosophical exercise or philosophical writing on their part.
I,
Do you
I
think that
can't
that was the predominant reason
I
they
can't
were
know the
writing?
intention, but clearly it's been framed since, and maybe at the time it wasn't intended this way, as to be one of the main kernels of the Christian text, right? So there's also that
True.
aspect to it, which, I mean, it kind of feeds into your argumentation, but what was maybe intended at the time, or what people were saying at the time, weren't necessarily intended to be framed as they're framed today. And that includes in the way perhaps that I'm framing it in this way. But by doing so, I mean, to be fair, I feel like I have not have a right. That's too obnoxious. But one of the reasons I'm not Christian is because I don't agree with all the scripture. I find it difficult to understand
Sure.
how the Bible
Well,
is anything but a philosophical text if you're going to interpret it the way you interpret it. In which case, why is it the best
well,
book in the world, shall we say, when it comes to ethics? Why are there not better books in regards to this?
well, I would say, well, like real quick on that, I would say like the problem, like I have a really easy defeater for this for you because if we're going to read it as literally kind of or directly as you're reading it, Leviticus only applies to Jews. I'm not a Jew. That
Okay.
book is talking about laws
What are
for
you're a
Jews and
subset of Jews?
Israelites.
You're, to be frank, I mean, I would
I'm not.
were you in subset of Jews? That's just a modern interpretation, but
No,
in a sense,
I am a
Christian.
Gentile explicitly. The whole point of yeah. I mean, I understand your argument, but I'm sorry, like the Bible literally and the intent of the Christian faith after Jesus's life was to bring in Gentiles.
Okay, so
I
but
am one of those.
so what you're saying is that the Old Testament is completely irrelevant to Christians because it's only applicable to Jewish people.
I think that any imperative that might come from the Old Testament is not applicable to Gentiles. There is no imperative that comes from the Old Testament that apply to a Christian. And
But
this is talked about by Paul. Paul talks about this where there's a big discussion in the Bible about whether or not Gentiles need to become circumcised. And Paul specifically says, why are we no, we don't need to keep up these, we do not need to keep maintaining these old faith traditions like this. That is not what the Old Testament is for. That is not that is not what our current faith is about. All right,
mm,
that is part of our history. That is part of our religious history. But adhering to those old laws and rules, that is not what this current faith is about. We have our text. We have our arguments for why we should act the way we are and things that we need to do. And those are not. If you want to do them, you can. But we are not going to force people to do those in order to be Christian. It's pretty explicit in the Bible.
well, I mean, I think that's also one of the difference between the Catholic Church and the Protestant Church. I mean, circumcision is quite common in Catholic communities in Europe, at least, which suggests that they're paying somewhat more adherence to the Old Testament in this regards. But I would also say that my knowledge of the Bible is pretty limited. I mean, I can, take a bunch of quotes and I have some understanding of them, but let alone the fact that in terms of the language, it's been translated so many times, and then you need to be in the context to truly understand the meaning of the words. So I see ambiguity in the language, but I think we both agree that even what is intended in this Old Testament, in this part of the Old Testament, neither of us really agree with. But then again, I mean,
Sure.
is there anything that you disagree with in the New Testament then?
Um, is there anything I disagree? I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I would ever frame it that way. Um, I can disagree with interpretations of the New Testament. It's kind of like the way there are people that will interpret part of the New Testament. There's parts of the New Testament that talk about not having sex with gay people. There's a part in Romans that talks about it, and there's a debate on whether or not it's referring to having sex with men or having sex with children. Um, again, to me, it's talking about a very like different kind of lifestyle than what we understand as homosexuality, and it's also kind of one line mixed in with a bunch of others,
Mm-hmm.
and it has a lot more to do with talking to a specific group of people, telling them to act a specific way. So the New Testament, for the most part, is all just a bunch of letters that have been turned into books. These are all letters that people are writing to each other and discussing the way, which was what Christianity used to be called, this new religion that they're founding and creating. And a lot of these letters are from church fathers to churches in other lands, in other parts of the Roman Empire and other places, and saying, this is how you should act while you are over there. And part of it might be because, okay, you need to, act in a moral or ethical way. But other of it might be you need to be acting different. You need to separate yourself from the people in that area. You need to show yourself as different. And it's kind of and I think that a lot of these very strong imperatives that people take from the New Testament have more to those church leaders telling their followers, you need to separate yourselves from the actions of these Romans, of these other peoples. You are different and you need to make yourself different. You should not blend in, because at the time it was very important to separate yourselves from these societies that had different beliefs, to create their own cultures so that the faith could grow and things like that.
But this is
And
about
it's
separation. I mean, is this really a good intention you're describing here? This is to split and
yes,
divide and polarize. I mean, we're seeing this in the modern day, that polarization
yes.
generally is a bad thing, right?
No, no. I think that I think that it can be a bad thing. I think in this instance, it was a good thing. The whole point of there's a very famous Sermon on the Mount where Jesus comes and he says, "I am a sword. I have come to divide. If you do not hate your father and love me, or if you do not hate your father, you do not love me. If you do not hate your brother, you do not love me." It is important that whenever you become a Christian, you are choosing this life to become a Christian and you're rejecting the life around you, right? And it's not saying that you have to like totally become a new person,
Mm.
but it's the idea that you are intentionally trying to live a better life. You're intentionally trying to live in a way that is ethical and is to the benefit of the people around you. And in doing so, that will naturally create boundaries and barriers that people around you will not like, and it will cause conflict, and it will cause you to separate from those people. It'll happen. So like a mutual friend of ours, Stephen Bennell, talked about something similar a few years ago around a time in life whenever he got a divorce. Before that, and around the time that he got a divorce, he talked about, actually it has more to do with, I think, Mr. Girl and Lav and a few of those people. He realized at the time, whenever he started creating boundaries for himself to say, I'm going to be respected, I'm going to be talked about this way, and I'm not going to let you say things about me. I'm not going to let you act this way around me. Those people around him disliked that such that they were no longer his friends, said horrible things about him, divorced him, and things like that.
Mm.
And that's what this division in Christianity is about, is saying you are going to start acting ethically, you are going to start acting better along these ethical guidelines, and the people that you were previously interacting with will not like it. It will create division. It will cause separation, and you need to be ready for that. And you need to be able to handle that, because you, at the end of that, you need to be able to accept the fact that you are going to lose people because you want to live a better life. And you know, to me, whenever they're talking to these people in the Bible and telling these people that that separation is coming, is going to happen, it's going to come with it some imperatives. And at the time, that was a thing. It was, sexuality was not understood in the same way as it is now. It was not as strict as we kind of have it nowadays, these kind of categories. And the act of sleeping with a man was not homosexuality. It was just a thing, just having sex with a man, right? And creating that kind of more structured life kind of was a part of separation. And if people want to take that to mean no one can ever be gay and go to heaven, they can. I just choose not to interpret it that way. And I don't see a lot more in the Bible that builds that up. So for instance, I think it's harder to be a lawyer in a Christian than a gay person in a Christian,
Okay,
because
explain
they talk
explain that then.
so much shit. They talk so much shit about lawyers. Jesus himself has multiple quotes in there talking about how horrible lawyers are and how they're going to hell. It's like legit, like he just goes off in full paragraphs. And then there's one line by one of Jesus's followers in a book that was written after he died. Well, they were all written after he died. But you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Just don't fuck guys. And that has spawned a massive hatred and bigotry in society that is unaccepting of gay people and other queer people. Meanwhile, there is so much discussion about how bad lawyers are,
Well,
and there
well,
is not a now people dislike lawyers for personal reasons, but not on religious grounds, right?
no, but we're
And
talking about
so
religious
it,
grounds here. So, I mean, what I want to
I
understand
know,
how you can, because I find you an incredibly rational and reasonable person, and yeah, and I sound a bit harsh in this way. I mean, I will preface what I'm saying with I see so many good churches and Christians and people that practice a good way of living, a very considerate and loving way of living, and they'll tell me it's been because of their religion, but I just think it's because of their nature, and it may, to be frank, it seems like a bit of an excuse, perhaps. But it may be because they're part of a community which then reinforces these ideas. But I think it could have been under the umbrella of any, not just a religion, but an ideology, I want to say, that's kind of loosely applied, which is how I feel that you're applying your religion. But then there's this theistic aspect of this, right? That even if these aren't directly the words of God, perhaps how the Quran is interpreted, right? There's still this notion that these words are superior to the words of Aristotle, right?
Sure. Yeah. No, yeah.
I don't find that in
thing.
itself rational, right? How Aristotle can be considered a worse ear to. Sorry, you continue. Yeah.
I don't think that I would. I mean, like, obviously, I would say that the Bible is better. I don't know. It's a weird way to put it, but it's kind of a thing where it's like I have a hard time going to the Bible and finding things in it that I can't apply in my life. And then if I find things that are difficult for me to accept, and it's not just gay people, there's other stuff in there.
Mm-hmm.
To me, the response is not, well, I guess I've just got to grit my teeth and go outside and start beating up gay people.
Yeah.
My response is, why is this here? Why is this thing that doesn't make sense to me here? And I start doing research. I own copies of the Bible in the original Greek.
Mm-hmm.
I have friends who are very well studied on this. I do a lot of research. I listen to lectures, and I hear the arguments around these things, right? And the other part of it, right, is that whenever I'm looking at the Bible and I'm saying, this is an important book to me, it's not saying that every single word in it is important. It's saying, okay, what are the messages? And there's a part of the Bible where someone walks up to Jesus and they say, hey, what's the most important thing for me to do as your follower? Like, what are the most important rules? And Jesus looks at him with no metaphors, no stories, just straight words, just goes, love God and love other people. Okay. That's it. And so, that's a foundation, okay, that's where we're starting from. And if I read something in the Bible that doesn't seem like it adheres to that,
yes, there's a contradiction.
I need to do more research and understand. But it is a contradiction, or I'm just not knowledgeable enough to engage with that right now. And so I need to understand it before I can actually act upon what I'm reading.
But how do you know when you are knowledgeable enough or somebody else is knowledgeable enough? I mean, there's always this intrinsic uncertainty or understanding, right?
I'm not going to ever comment on other people's engagement with their religion or faith. I don't think it's appropriate to do that. For myself, it's just a sense of it's a learning, and whenever things make sense, and I think it's with any other philosophy or any other ideology, it's what makes sense to you. And for me, it's whenever I look at, to me, when I see in Romans where someone's saying, hey, don't have sex with men, I don't see it as them saying it's loving. You love other people if you attack gay people and tell them they can't live their lives. I don't see love there. I do see this person trying to help a church grow, trying to help separate these people from the society they're in to create this church, and them saying, by doing this, you will grow a stronger church, you will support each other, you will survive. And I do see the love in that, even if the message in it I don't agree with. Now, do I look at that and go, do I need to follow that? Is that something that's going to help me in my life? Is that going to help me love other people? Is it going to help me love God? But I don't see that. So then why would I follow it?
Those passages don't have to suggest that somebody else externally from that experience or that situation needs to go out and enforce the Bible on other people, right? So it isn't. I mean, that's to be frank, a little bit of a straw man argument that it could be insinuated that in that regard. But it's this notion that you can even prioritize within the Bible. In theory, they shouldn't. If there's contradictions, then both arguments that are contradicting one another within the Bible start to become void. You can then choose to go either way, right? As soon as you find any kind of contradiction, it's like, well, okay, which one seems to make sense for me? But then at that point, it's moving away from the Bible itself, right? So, I mean, because you're a very rational being and you're clearly going through this and looking for the historical context. But in the end, I feel like both you and me get as much from the Bible as each other, because I value the Bible to an extent. And just as with Aristotle, I mean, of course, he writes, he's a racist, frankly, in the Bible. He believes in slavery. He argues in the Bible, in Nicomachean Ethics. So the point being, but I'm kind of entitled to say, well, I don't agree with that passage because it's not a religious scripture. So, I mean, this is a good segue into the next part of the conversation I wanted to go into, which is
one last thing before we try to go. One last thing.
Okay.
I just say it doesn't. One of the reasons why it doesn't quite scan for me to kind of make this like delineation between Aristotle and the Bible is that the Gospels were written by people that had read Plato and all that stuff, and they were taught alongside Plato and all that kind of stuff, right? Like all the Greek, like there's laws on the books in Rome ordering the book of Luke to no longer be taught alongside Plato because of how common it was. The Bible is a continuation.
Oh, I agree.
Of those ideas. So separating them like that is a bit odd for me to think about.
Well, I'm not
because in my mind, I don't separate them.
No. I mean, it would be much more difficult to talk about John Stuart Mill and utilitarianism, even though, I mean, of course, he was a Christian and very much a Protestant. I mean, that's a little bit more difficult to kind of consolidate.
I understand. I just wanted to,
but
I say that real quick just to get that out.
But
it's a thing that people often will do.
I mean, the contradictions between, say, Aristotle or Christianity are in terms of the kernel of both ethics is far and few between. They're both virtue ethics, right? Which is about intentionality and about shaping one's character. Whereas by the Enlightenment period, we developed this utilitarianism under Bentham, and then Mill developed even further. And then it was about ends, not about means, shall we say. And so you can have whatever intentionality in theory you want. This is taking it to an extremer case, but it's really about the ends of something, which is very contradictory to Christianity. So that is a little bit more difficult to reconcile. So, I mean, choosing Aristotle, partly because I also find value in it myself. So it's a worked example, not just hypothetical. It's a little bit softer to reconcile. And as you say, there are arguments that there was a continuation of Aristotelian ethics in the Bible, and effectively that's what they were trying to integrate into Christian beliefs.
And I don't go to as far to say like it's like the next step or something, but I think they understood it. They said, great, we're going to take the parts of it we like, we're going to add it to this, and we're going to try to keep building something that we think is better, right? Like there's some people that think that like there's this through line and I don't partake in that. I think that there's just a relationship between them that was intentionally obscured, and then I think should be acknowledged nowadays.
But what about newer texts on ethics or the development of meta-ethics, for example? I mean, wouldn't you say that there's an evolution of the understanding of ethics? And if not, if there is, then of course those books to some extent are superior or may contradict the Bible, but in ways that are more coherent with a stronger sense of ethics or a more effective means of applying ethics. That's a whole other discussion about the purpose of ethics, if there even is one. Or you say, well, no, sorry, the Bible is more important. So there's this irrationality if you go for the latter, of course, in my opinion.
Well, I think there's a kind of a question of the purpose of what's being written. So like my view, just to give a real quick version of it, is of the Bible. Okay, one aspect of the Bible is that it is an amazing text to look at how a society goes from a family group to a tribe to a kingdom to a client state of an empire, and then we see how do you survive in a proto-modern similar to secularized society and remain an ethical person, right? And when I look at it that way, it actually gives a lot of understanding of why certain people gravitate to certain types of the Bible. So like looking at like Puritans that came over to America in the colonies, there's a super strict adherence to the Old Testament there. There was a ton of value placed on the Old Testament and less on the New Testament. Why? Because the Old Testament talked about how you forge a new society for yourself out of the wilderness. That is a huge part of the Old Testament, right? How do you take the wilderness, tame it, and turn it into something that you now control? And how do you do that with your family? How do you do that with your tribe? How do you do that with this unit and cohesive thing to build yourself into a state, right? The New Testament does not give you very much information on how to do that. It talks about how to be an ethical person within an already built and somewhat modernized society. So that's how they viewed it, right? And so that's why I think that in our society, the New Testament is very useful. It has those kind of discussions. And so when I look at what the goal of these ethical texts are, and to be fair, I've not read a lot of ethical texts because I think that philosophy is really fucking boring and I don't like reading about it. And I have read some, and I've taken philosophy classes, and I'm not saying it's not valuable. It's just for me in my brain, I just don't give a shit. And I know that's very rude. I'm sorry, but it's just where I'm at. But that being said, I don't think that like these other ethical texts are valueless, but I think that the purpose of those ethical texts is very different than the Bible, right? Because I agreed with you that it is a religious text, and I think the point of that book is less so about being like, we need to solve ethics and how to be the most perfectly ethical person. And I think more of the goal is like, one, here's like these ethics that if you have them, they will help you lead a better life, right? It's going to lead you towards leading a better life. I think that whenever I look at other ethical questions like just utilitarianism, because I'm at least a little bit familiar with that, I don't think there's as much focus on the individual and their kind of interaction with ethics as much as the individual's ethics and how they affect society, right? And if I'm looking at like even the utilitarian ethics from an individual's perspective, I don't think there's a lot of reflection on like what those ethics do to the individual, more just what does the individual get out of implementing their ethics that way, right? So like,
well, that's kind of the whole
ends
point.
justify the means.
Yeah.
Right?
Generally, I mean, Bentham's certainly. I mean, Mill started to develop on that, and there are arguments for saying that it's a false dichotomy anyway. But it is a sense of prioritization. But I disagree that it's not applicable to the individual. The individual can't learn to hone the skills of utilitarian ethics.
It is applicable to
good.
It is applicable to the individual, but I think the goal for the individual there is different than with the Bible. I think the Bible's
it's a different rule set. Yeah, I mean, it's
different rule set, but different goal of why do I want to use utilitarian ethics versus why do I want to use the biblical ethics? Let's just put it that way, right? Well, the utilitarian ethics is telling me if I have my ethics this way, I will gain the most out of it in a kind of not strictly material, but in a somewhat material sense, in that I will have more things, I will be able to have access to more stuff, I will, even if it's just being happier, right? Whereas I think the biblical ethical imperative is to try to make you into a better person in such a way that like you are going to have a better impact in all of society. You're going to have a better impact on the people around you. And then you yourself are going to just have a better, healthier life. And by health, I mean like spiritual, mental, and things like that. I don't really see that in utilitarianism.
No, you can interpret utilitarianism that way. That as a body, as a group, about maximizing happiness, stabilizing happiness, creating a good foundation together. So it depends on what ends you choose. But I mean,
you're saying together, right? Like there's this. I don't personally in Christianity, whenever I'm looking at it, I think that the community aspect of it largely does not come from the text. I think the community aspect is largely separate from the text. The text is for individuals, specifically for individual ethics and how you can be a better person, and by doing that, you will become better, right? And better in so many different ways. But I would not say in a kind of ends way. I don't think there's like this payoff that you are getting. It is the act of being ethical. Being ethical is the good that you are receiving, and you will. It's kind of circular in a way, but it's like by acting this way, just you acting that way is what's making you better. It's not like there's you doing this means that society will become better, which then reflects back on you, right? You're not paying into a charity so that society gets better, so that down the line you live in a better society and it's better for you. You doing it makes you into a better person, and it makes you, that itself is good, and you are becoming good from it, right?
I mean, you can yes, but on the other hand, you can argue that you could do the same thing with utilitarianism, and it's about learning behaviors with ends that make you a better person in that society, and by being a better person in that society, the society as a whole is also more productive. So I mean, you can, but this is the thing that, in a sense, it's already a false dichotomy to some extent. But there is an aspect of prioritizing the ends a little bit more very much more in utilitarianism, whereas in virtue ethics, which Christianity very much is, and I think that is what you're trying to insinuate. It's about about shaping your intention, right? So even if you make mistakes, it really,
Yeah.
in a sense, doesn't matter, because if you intended well and genuinely intended well, and only you, given the private language argument here, or the private mind argument, sorry, can know if you really did have those good intentions, or you and God. And this segues very, very nicely onto another part of the discussion I really wanted to go into, which was your notion of God and your relationship with God. So you would say you believe in a Christian God, right? And there's perhaps other notions of God, or would you say it's just God
Um,
for you?
I mean, I believe in God, and the way that I like express that belief is through the Christian faith and things like that. I don't really have an exclusionary faith. I don't think that's an appropriate like belief to have. Um, and so like for me, it's just like the way that I've always described it is like I look at the Bible in the same way that I would look at like someone doing an etching, right? So you lay down a piece of paper over like a stone and you know, do a crayon over it. And
Mm-hmm.
parts of it, when you take that piece of paper away, parts of it are have color, parts of it have white space still, but you have this etching. And I kind of view the Bible as that, where the Bible is this kind of etching of whenever God interacted with the world, and kind of the result of that.
Mm.
And you know, it's expressed itself in this way that there's this Christian God and things like that, and that's fine. But I view him as largely an unknowable being, and it's not particularly important to like have a full or even partial understanding of who God is. Just I think that a God exists, and I think that you know he. If I was to like describe him as best I can, it's like I think there's a God that exists
Mm.
in a metaphysical way. I don't think that he is. There's any kind of verifiable way to prove his existence.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think that he has some level of care for humanity and our well-being.
Okay.
And then outside of that, I don't have much more that I can say about him.
Okay. So God is good. There's a good
I
God.
think God cares about. No, no, I don't know if he's good. I think that God has some level of care for humanity. I don't know if he's good. I know that he cares about humanity to some degree.
Okay, but so God does care. And you're also saying he, which I also find interesting, although in other languages everything's genderized, but that the God is a he, not an it, or not a she, which
I mean,
is that
I'm
just
fine
ran?
with
Okay, so for you it's just
it's a traditional
yeah,
reference
okay,
to him,
okay,
right? Like I don't if God revealed themselves to be a woman or to be a gender, I would be like, okay, that's
okay.
fine.
So it's just a convention, and it's nothing to do with what God actually is, being
Yeah.
some kind of male, shall we say? But still, you have this notion that God cares. I mean, is care not a human notion, a human, quite an artificial idea? Can you say whether an animal
Um,
cares about
I
another
mean,
animal or not?
I
And
mean, I mean, I'm using care generally here. Like you could say that he has some level of investment in humanity. He has some care. He has some interest or some reason to want to improve humanity from where it was and it's without him, right? He wants at some level, he wants his interaction with humanity to be positive. Uh, and I think that that's kind of the extent that I could say about what I know about God. I can't see any evidence of any other descriptions of God that I've seen has like been like maybe, but I don't have any way of knowing if
uh,
God is like that,
and
right?
is there a fairness to how this is applied? Is God
Fairness
fair?
to who?
Well, is God fair to humans on Earth in the way that He cares?
Um, Yeah, I mean, generally, I don't really see an unfairness. I think that there's some parts of the Old Testament where I kind of question that, but like for the most part, yeah, I think he's fair.
And do you think that people's lives are improved by experiencing or learning about God or the Christian God?
I think they can. I think that it's probably one of the most useful things that you can have happen to you. I think that
Okay, yeah.
faith in
So
God
okay,
and things
so
like that, yeah, it's probably like one of the most positive things that you could do. Though it can be incredibly harmful, but
but
you know, a
on
good
average, it's a good thing, right? You're saying on average, it's better
Oh,
for
I don't know
someone
about
to.
that. I don't know if I'd make that statement.
Okay,
I think that it can be. I think that it can be an incredibly good, if not the most good thing that can happen to you. I don't. Big generalization statements like that. I don't
but
know.
it could be as
It's not
bad
a. It's a,
as it is good. There is no sense in which it's
right,
better or worse.
but it's
It's
well,
neutral
sure,
on
but it's
average.
well, but what I'm saying is that I don't think that it might be neutral on average. It might be worse on average. It might be better on average. But I know that on an individual level, it can be the greatest thing. I don't think it's a neutral or worse, which I think that's how a lot of people approach to believe in God, where it's like it either doesn't matter or it hurts you. And I don't think that. I think it
No,
means
but we both
for my
agree with
life, it's
this.
been immensely helpful.
It's a stochastic thing. Like it can be many things to many people. Clearly, there are cases of people going towards extremism in every religion. Therefore,
Yeah,
is a bad thing, right? Clearly, in your
sure.
case, I mean, I think you're a great person, and I think
Thank
it would
you.
be a bit silly to deny that it may have played a positive role in your life, right? So clearly, it's gone in a good
Oh
direction.
yeah.
So there's a distribution of outcomes, but would you say the distribution is positive or negative on average?
Um, I'd probably go on the positive side. I think there's some pretty good arguments that it's positive. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I've never thought of it really that way. But I'd say generally I'd put it on the positive distribution side. Yeah.
But then how can it be fair if people live in a certain area of the world where they have no ability or had no ability at least to have contact with Christianity? So if God was fair, wouldn't he spread Christianity homogeneously around the globe? Or do other religions take on that role as well? And so it's as long as
No,
there's
I think
some.
the other religions can.
Okay, but why is Christianity better than Judaism or better than Hinduism, or how can we say that Christianity is better in this way? And try and tie this into the notion
That's
of.
I don't know. You're using that's exclusionary language. I wouldn't use. I wouldn't use exclusionary language like that.
Okay,
I would just talk about why it's good for me.
okay,
Why I can say why I choose it, but I can't say why it's like better than other religions. Like it's like by itself.
but
But it doesn't make sense for me to make that statement.
does the Bible preach this, that it doesn't really matter which one you believe in or how you believe in this? Um, I mean, how does
You
it?
can find exclusionary language if you want to,
Mm,
but
um,
but again, I don't know how that's loving God, and I don't know how that's loving people, other people to do that.
but I mean,
And I
this.
don't really see why. I, Go ahead.
So I'm bringing the conversation back into the previous part, which is more about the interpretation of the Bible and the importance of it. But I mean, now I'm trying to inquire because for me, I mean, I haven't really put forward too much of my own theistic beliefs. Um, I mean, I'm a physicist, and when I look at the laws of nature, I realize we learn about them not to manipulate them and change them, but actually to obey them and to work with them. Why? Because they are unbreakable. And actually, the way in which the fundamental forces of nature work, which at the moment we understand are four forces of nature, their origins are the same. And so there's issues of causation. I mean, Descartes realized this big problem of duality, of strong duality. And ultimately, what that means is that there can only be one entity. And so this one entity I can call nature. So I haven't read Spinoza yet, forgive my ignorance, but it seems to be very similar in line with his theistic beliefs. Um, and to me, there's a lot of analogues with nature and God as many people interpret it, as are some of the things that you've insinuated this evening. But then goes back to why one of the main reasons I wanted to have this conversation, which was I don't see any reason, therefore, or thereafter, for there to be superfluous need to believe in a Bible or a specific God, or what is your notion of God that's different from what I've just described? I mean, I can't talk to my God. There's no way I can pray to the God I've just described. That's one difference. You can pray to your God, right?
Sure.
And so you speak
Well, it's like I mean,
directly to God, or is it to yourself and you're part of God? How do you interpret that?
um, I mean, to me, the issue is that whenever I think about my belief in God, right? But to answer your direct question, I might think to myself or speak to myself and just, speak to him directly,
Hmm.
and that's it. Um, but I think the issue here is that kind of whenever I'm believing in God and those things, there is a very like tactile feeling to it in the sense that um, if I believe in God, if I believe in the Christian God that I described to you, right? There I can identify three things that I get right now from it, right? One, I believe that I'm never alone. Two, I believe that I'm always loved. And three, I believe that I'll be forgiven for the mistakes that I make. Okay. And what comes with that, okay, is an understanding that even if even if everybody in my life leaves me, I still have someone with me, and I am not alone, and that is a comfort. There's a comfort that even if people do not like, even if I have people around me they don't like me, there is someone that accepts me and loves me for who I am, no matter what. And then there's, well, not no matter what, but accept me for who I am. And then finally, it allows me to know that if I make mistakes, I do not have to carry them with me for the rest of my life. And those three things, then coming from them, comes an immense amount of self confidence, of the ability to make mistakes without fear, to take risks, knowing that I have something to fall back on, right? And so, whenever I'm believing in this and believing in my God and my religion and things like that, there are downstream effects that help me as a person.
Mm.
Okay. And so whenever you ask me, okay, well, what about these other religions? I don't know. Maybe those other religions also give that to those people.
Mm-hmm.
And if they do, right, I think that they're getting a lot of what God would want people to get out of their belief in him. I think that God, if God didn't have to reveal himself to humans in any way and didn't have to interact with humans in any way, and we would be totally fine, I think he would have done that. Right. I think that God, I guess that I would make about God is that he would like to limit his interaction with us as much as possible for whatever reason, right? His direct interaction with us as much as possible. It seems like it whenever I'm reading the Bible that that's how he's acting, and it seems like it considering I don't think there's a whole lot of direct action by God uh, going on in the ways that you might read about in the Bible. And so that's just a conclusion I came to. And so
Mm.
I think that he wants that for people. And so I might be able to look at other faiths and say, like, I disagree maybe with some of what their imperatives are or people's interpretations. But whenever you say, like, are these things fair? I don't think that God is interested. I think that God's interested in making, helping humanity in certain ways, but I don't think that God is interested in, say, like, avoiding suffering for humans or necessarily like saying, oh, like, if you never met me, then you're going to go to hell. He might, and if he does, okay, that he gets to do that. He's God. He's got all the cards. But I don't see why he would act that way. And so I don't really have. That's why I don't really condemn all those other religions or things like that because just like I don't see why he would do that. I don't see. It doesn't make sense to me that he would do that, and so I just don't think he does. I could be corrected. Maybe someday he'll reveal that. When I die and go to heaven, he'll say, actually, yeah, no, fuck all the non-Christians. They're not here. I'll go, damn, I didn't realize you were fucking that hardcore. But it doesn't jive very well with my understanding of God and the Bible and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, your interpretation of here we can see some clear differences, right? I mean, my notion of God is very, very neutral. There is no good or bad. It's just simply the way it is. So in a sense, it's very fair because it's not good.
Well,
And so it doesn't push in one direction or another. It's just simply and it's very unconscious. It's nothing that could have these humanistic words of to love or to care. But I feel that in some respects, and if you don't mind me, this might sound patronizing and insult me if it feels that way.
sure.
But in some respects, I feel like you're learning to love yourself or forgive yourself, and that's the process that's going on with this dialogue, shall we say, or this connection
Sure.
you're describing. And from my perspective, that's what's happening, which is often what can happen through meditation and other practices, right?
Yeah.
So,
No, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I mean, but then, okay, there could be. This is almost an agnostic position for you to say yes to me to this, because then it could be a God, or it could just be that you're self-reflecting at a higher level, and at that moment you're able to think, okay, I can let go, I can accept. It can be letting go of your ego, whatever it might be. So it could be multiple forms here, and if you're open to
Well, but
that,
let me ask you, let me interrogate you that. If religion helps me get to that point faster, does that make religion a bad thing or a good thing? If I
well,
if
well,
there are people that would have never reached that point if not for religion, is religion a good thing or a bad thing?
well, if religion is purely neutral, then it's not an argument for it, is it? So I mean, I'm not saying whether religion is a
Well, I
good or
don't think
bad
it's
thing.
neutral.
Well, exactly. You
Well, I
think
don't
it's a
think
good.
I don't.
You think it's a good thing, right?
Yeah.
And what I'm saying is, I'm not sure, and I also feel that for some people who don't want to solve problems, that maybe it's a good thing or it's a simplification of a problem. But for someone that is so thoughtful as yourself, that's part of the reason I wanted to have this stream today was because It's
Well,
therein seems the contradiction more than necessarily contradictions in the Bible, is that the way in which you've approached it about this historical context, and even reading the ancient Greek, which I have a huge and immense respect for, then you're treating it in the same way that I'm treating it myself. But then you also have this private relationship you're talking about that strengthens you, but that can exist
yeah,
independently of Christianity, right? You can still feel that there's a God that forgives you and loves you and kind of shepherds you
sure.
and guides you, but that isn't necessarily the Christian God anymore if it's not about being entirely in line with what the Bible has suggested or with Jesus Christ himself, right? There's more to it than what Christ has given you, right? There's something else as well, this theistic aspect.
Well, sure. I don't. I mean, like, I'm not. I'm not all encompassed. Like, my faith isn't entirely like so laser focused on the Bible. I think my faith is the Bible is part of my faith, but it's not the center of my faith. But I think that I think there's a few things in there, right? So one, you're saying that you can reach these things, these kind of benefits that I talk about without Christianity or even religion, and I agree with you. Um, there's a, but I would, the way that I view it, right, to use a sciency metaphor that I might butcher here, is you can probably find a ton of very reactive compounds that naturally occur in nature, right? Things that just will, it's surprising that it exists considering how reactive it is, but just because of the confluences, how things went, this super reactive compound might exist in nature, even if it's just for a brief second. And humans might go, well, that's really useful. We want that very reactive compound to use for something. And so we could go and search and look and try to find it naturally and then collect it where we can, try to contain it, things like that. Or we could develop some kind of catalyst and say, well, we just use this and just make a bunch of it for us right here.
Mm.
And to me, I view religion and belief in God in a lot of ways as that catalyst. I think that, especially again, like I was talking about before, where you have a family, tribe, nation, client state of an empire, people existing within an empire, getting to that downstream positive is incredibly difficult for the vast majority of people. Okay. They can
Mm.
get there. I don't know if it's necessarily true that they can get there without religion at all. I think it's possible. I wouldn't say that like religion is super vital in the same way that like a Jordan B. Peterson might argue. But I think for a lot of people, without
Mm.
it, they could not reach those types of internal workings. I think that it's literally a part of for so many people, whether they don't have the emotional intelligence or just the straight up intelligence to be able to reach those conclusions, to reach those ethical points on their own, even reading non-religious texts. I think there's an aspect to it there.
Oh,
And so I think
I
there's a
entirely
huge amount
agree.
of value for it there.
I mean,
So like,
I wanted to square Christianity with rationality, for the individual, shall we say, not for necessarily whether it's a good thing that big chunks of our society are religious, and for them it helps them, and they simply and it sounds arrogant, it probably is arrogant, but it may also be right at the same time to say they don't have the mental faculties to come to this notion of emergent ethics and to have this sense of being part of a community is a good and healthy thing. But following from your analogy, let's say for the inquisitive person, I mean, do you believe that Christian ethics as they are now is the perfection, is the ultimate Platonic form of ethics?
um, like probably not, but only in the sense like I don't know. That's like a really weird question when you think about like
I mean, could there be something
if
better
I wouldn't say that, but if
in terms of as a
possible, I think
okay, and to
it's
get to,
but it's kind of a thing where like I don't know like I don't know if that is because the question is then like what's the goal of like what are when you're saying like the best possible the platonic form of ethics. I have to understand what the goal that you're trying to reach. I think that it is probably that if you were like looking for like in my mind, I would say for me it is no, I don't know. I don't know how to engage with that question. I'm sorry. I probably wouldn't say it, but I guess
okay, but
maybe I would.
I'm
It's hard to
I'm trying
understand.
to set up an argument using your analogy with the synthesizing of compounds, because I was going to insinuate by okay, you can go around and look for these compounds and form a catalyst to form a concentrate of them, but you can also learn to construct them. But by learning to construct them, you learn something about the mechanics of how they're constructed in the first place, which could teach you whether there are better compounds for that purpose. And the purpose of ethics, I'm leaving to one side because that's also a whole interesting discussion in itself. But it could also teach you that there is no better compound. But you learn that to a greater extent by constructing that compound and knowing how you can, and you have even the ability to construct that compound. And so in this analogy is the ability to construct these ethics and to build them from the foundation upwards. I mean, to build again on my own beliefs, I think that there is effectively a universal ethics that's an emergent property out of our biology as social creatures. So in the end, we function to a greater extent when we cooperate, and ethics helps us do that. So there's an argument from a scientific perspective for a universal ethics, a lot of it which shares with Christianity, I must say.
I think that, like, in your question about, like, can we learn these things? Like, yeah, I mean, it's possible. And I think that, like, to me, it's like, I had a conversation with my priest a while ago, and he asked me, like, if, you know, in 100 years, if Christianity was gone, would that be a bad thing? And I said, probably not. Because if that's the case, like, if I truly believe in God, I believe that, you know, I don't believe that anything can happen that would be like against God's will, right? I don't think that's possible. And so if Christianity died out, it's probably because God willed it to be, or in the sense that God did not will it to continue. And I also think that God just at that point would say, well, the things that I'm trying to do, the things that I'm trying to help humans with, is no longer, it no longer needs Christianity, right? Like if we got to a point where it said, okay, we can objectively say that these ethics that we have here are better than Christianity, and so we're going to get rid of Christianity, not use it anymore, and just use these ethics. I don't know if necessarily that is like against God, right? Because I don't know if God is so small as to be contained within their Christian religion and to be so, you know, one note as to only exist within the version of the book of the Bible. And so it's hard for me to see, like, to believe that there's this God that exists that is so vast and powerful and metaphysical that he can then be so tied to just this human religion that if that human religion was extinguished, it would somehow have some effect on him. It's a very strange, like, idea for me, because because also it could be that God created Christianity to give us that initial enzyme for us to then to say, hey, thank you, Christianity, for showing us that. Now we found these other things and our lives are much better because of it. But we could have never gotten here if we did not originally have Christianity to get here.
But then then you could also argue that God brought me to discuss this with you to convince you that Christianity in isolation is not the most effective religion, and that being entirely pragmatic with your views of what should be read and notions of God is the ultimate solution. But then this feeds into discussions about determinism and how determined we are, or the space for indeterminism.
Well, sure, but the deal is, for me, is like I'm not particularly interested in identifying God's intentions in those ways. I trust God. I trust that he's going to do the right thing and that he's made the right decisions, right? I've talked with somebody in the past about this, where I view God not as kind of this guy that just kind of like shows up and does something and then leaves. I view him as kind of this like gardener, okay? And like reality / time is like a tree that's growing, and he is pruning and taking off branches, and those branches are possibilities of the future, okay? And so he's coming in and saying, I will involve myself only so much as I need to prevent these branches that I don't want to become the main line as I want, right? It's a bit of a mixed metaphor. It doesn't work entirely, but and then that I think is a good description of the Old Testament. And then I think what happens is, at one point he says, I am done pruning. What I'm going to do instead is select a branch, and that is going to become the main trunk. Everything that comes after it is acceptable to me, and I will no longer prune. And that's Jesus Christ coming down, dying, coming back, forgiving us for our sins. And from that point on, he accepts that Christianity, as it was born and created, has laid the groundwork so that any possible timeline that comes after it is acceptable to him and within his will. And so that's kind of how I view it. And so for me, whenever I'm looking at kind of this deterministic things, like, is everything planned out in the future? It's like, I think that God can see every possible timeline. And at this point, he's happy with every time, like he accepts every possible timeline that could come after, because his work is already done. It's not quite the clockmaker that creates the universe and walks away. That's why I say it's kind of like a gardener who's pruning a tree as it grows, and once it gets to a certain age, he goes, okay, now I'm happy with it. I will let it grow as it wants to because I'm happy with what I've created, right? And he might still come and sit under the tree and enjoy the shade, or enjoy the fruits of that tree, or climb in it and observe it and things like that, in the same way that he has his interaction with me and other people that believe in him. But he does not need to come in and make such a big impact because he already did what he needed to. And so that's why, if, let's say, Christianity faded away, okay, well, that's fine. He already built this timeline, these myriad of possible timelines, such that he's happy with humanity's eventual future and our progression and understanding of ethics, right? If ethics continue to evolve, for him, that's fine because he gave us the tools to get to that point. Whether or not it's a direct result, like it's a direct progression from Christianity, or we use Christianity for a while and we go, you know what? That was great for what we had it, but now we need to change to this other one, right?
But,
He might, his actions are that bridge.
but this is one of the aspects I don't fully understand. Is how that are you going to be aware of that point? Because within your mindset, you're holding on to Christianity ad infinitum. There doesn't seem to be a notion of which, if Christianity was to be left to the wayside, it wouldn't just vanish overnight and people would forget about it, right? It would still be there
Sure.
as some historical reference point.
Yeah.
How would someone really know, okay, well, this is the time to jump, right? This is the new religion, right? Because in some respects, Islam was an attempt at that, right? Of saying, okay, well, there's now time to jump to something better. And a lot of people believe that, of course. How can we
Yeah.
say, well, that we're not making the mistake of now not being Muslim? But why is, at which point, how do would we differentiate between a false jump and the genuine jump in which God would want us to
I don't
do?
think false jumps are possible anymore in the context of what we're talking about right now. I don't think God, again, I don't think at this point, I don't think anything could ever happen that's against God's will. In the past, he had to step in to prevent things from
Mm.
happening that would be against his will. But at this point, I don't think there's anything that can happen. There's no false jump. He accepts that we are going to do those things. He knows it, and he's foreseen that possibility, and he's okay with it. And it's kind of a thing where it's like the issue is not we need to be doing things right and making sure, right, that we make sure that we stay in these lanes so that we're always God is always happy with us, right? It's God's happy with us. He's provided us tools to live better and happier lives, and we have the option to accept that and live better and happier lives or not. But his direct wrath or direct imperatives to us are far less of this is we need to make sure that we're preempting him or understanding where he wants us to go, and far more, I think, just us being able to interact properly, have an understanding of other people around us and the society that we're in, such that it's going to make our lives and everybody's lives around us better. So it's because, again, let's say Islam did come up and everybody jumped over to Islam and started believing that. I don't think that God is then damn, I wish they all didn't do that, right? It's kind of a thing where I don't want to say it's oh, everything's okay because God wills it, that makes it okay. I'm not saying that that means that you can go kill people and it doesn't matter, right? You can still have a notion of good and bad and ethics and morals
Yeah,
without God
there's still
saying
there's
these are my paths.
yeah, but there's a potential of a false prophet coming along, right? And how are we meant to differentiate between false prophets and genuine prophets? I mean,
I think, well, what do you mean by that? I think that
well, someone's
my
saying, "Hey,
understanding.
I'm God telling you to jump now. This is the new religion. You're going to follow this." How are you meant to?
I would interrogate his ethical arguments and why.
But
There's a
compared
question
to what? Because
God,
it must be something
we can make
different
it
from
more
what.
severe.
It
You make
must
it more
be
severe. God shows up and tells me to commit genocide, right?
okay, but it doesn't have to be so.
And I would say no.
It doesn't have to be so to such an extreme. And then you could say, okay, but God works in mysterious ways. I mean, we've already been discussing this. Right? We're not always under. If there was a God of the nature that we're describing
No,
here,
I would tell God no. I would say I'm not going to do that. But
okay,
let's say a false prophet shows up, and the
yeah.
false prophet says to me, "You have to do all of these things because God says so."
Mm-hmm.
I currently do not exist with a religion that tells me I have to do everything that God explicitly says. Right? I have a Bible,
Mm.
and I'm looking at it, and I'm not reading it and going, I have to explicitly do everything in here. I have an understanding that I can read the Bible. If I don't understand it, or if I don't agree with something in there, I do more research. I do more, background, and I look at it, listen to other people's opinions, things like that, so I understand what I'm reading. If a false prophet showed up and said, I am the new son of God, I'm Jesus returned, and you have to follow me,
Mm.
I would talk to him, and if he did not, and if the things that he said to me did not comport with my understanding of my faith, I wouldn't follow him.
Mm.
right? And if I missed out on that, so be it. I'm not gonna like worry that like, because let's say that was the true son of God. Let's say Jesus does come back and he talks to me and I go, I don't want to follow you.
Mm.
Then I get to heaven and God was like, hey dude, that was Jesus. I
Mm.
go, okay, well, sorry I missed him, and too bad. If you wanted me to follow him, you should have done a better job. I mean, like, I tried, I didn't get it. Okay. You gotta kind of accept the fact that, like,
okay, so clearly
I mean, if God's
God
gonna be
can be
mysterious,
fallible,
he
and
can't be
um,
say again.
so clearly God can be fallible. I mean, in this regards, I mean, it wasn't perfect.
Yeah, sure. I don't think
Yeah.
that I don't accept that notion that God is infallible. I don't think that. I think that's a poorly supported argument. Is that
I
God is
mean, but
infallible.
just to finish around this point, I want to ask for a few minutes afterwards about Christianity in America right
Sure.
now. But I mean, I'm just going to give you a quick anecdote of my experience, and one of the reasons I'm motivated to have these types of conversations. So I often, well, fairly regularly commuted between somewhere in the south of the UK to somewhere in Belgium, and I do this by bike. So I'd cycle to the ferry port, take the ferry across to France, and cycle up to Belgium. And one evening, I often do this in the evenings, don't ask me why. So it was dark and wet and cold. I got a puncture at the just before the ferry port on the English side, and I got on this ferry.
What was in your tire?
Some glass, probably some crazy
Okay.
drunken football hooligan probably decided to drop glass all over the road. Typical British culture.
Mm.
Um, anyway, so I got on the ferry, and as I got on I think it was just before I got on the ferry, and I've met a number of priests getting on this ferry. I don't know why. I met a priest, and he saw me at a punch. He said, "I'll just put it in the car." And then we'd worked out quite early on that on the other side, he was driving up to the Netherlands, and so where I was living at that point in Belgium was kind of on the way, but he certainly put an extra 40 minutes into his journey by helping me out. Right. So in other words, a nice guy as well as a priest. And for me, this is a great opportunity to have a conversation.
Mhm.
And I think I'd already formulated at this point my theistic understanding that I have now. So I was probably more atheistic as a child, and then developed into this notion of, okay, but in some ways there's an analog between nature and God. And I explained this to this priest, but I said that for me, Jesus Christ, it's not as a blasphemous statement, but Jesus Christ is not, I can't really hold him to immense high esteem above all other thinkers, right? Because to me, he's a thinker. And I also, because of the lack of historical evidence, struggle to know who he really was. And sometimes I feel bad for him, especially things are done in his name, because I'm assuming he was probably a good guy with good intentions. But I said this to the priest, and I said, in the end, by the end of the journey, I said to him, "Do you think we're just believing the same thing, but with different language?" And he said no. And at that point, I realized that he did not see me as part of his community, and there was this delineation between this Christian community and myself, that I could never really be part of this community because I didn't believe in Christ. And my notion of God was maybe close. Maybe I could join the Jewish faith, but there's a lot of practice there that I also don't believe in an absolute way. And so there's this exclusivity of these communities that come from religion, which in itself I find can be a little bit dangerous and a little bit sad, because I actually wanted to reach out and say, you know what, we share so many similar beliefs. Let's not look at the differences, but let's look at the similarities. And I wasn't able to do that. And this man was a nice man. It wasn't like he was seeking division.
Well, I would just say that I really recommend you come visit me and come to my church, because my wife is a hardcore stone cold atheist.
All
And
right,
she
okay.
comes from a community in a country that is incredibly atheist. There
Yeah.
is no question God does not exist. And we started dating, and she was worried that I might try to convert her. I convinced her that I was not. And she was worried my family was going to convert her, because my family's Christian. And I was like, they're not. And she came whenever we were dating. Every once in a while, she might come to church with me, especially if we visit my parents, or we were, you know, she might go to that, and she thinks it's very beautiful. She respects Christians a lot.
Mm-hmm.
She likes how they treat her for the most part. Um, and then we, you know, got married, and I finished law school and I started going to church. And she came every so often, and then we had a baby. And I was like, oh, well, just so you know, the church has a free nursery. So while you're in church, so if we want we can drop the baby there, and then you can just sit in church with me for an hour and just take a break." And she's like, "That's fine," because she finds church to be somewhat relaxing. And now she comes pretty regularly with me. She has a lot of friends that are at my church. They all know she's an atheist. They all like her a lot, and we all get along really well. And there's no pressure or questions or like any kind of stigma around it. And they're all super accepting of her and love her a lot, and she loves all of them. And so I'm sorry they had the interaction, not in the sense that like I'm apologizing on his behalf. I mean, it's just I'm sorry
Yeah.
that that kind of interaction happen. And it's just because it doesn't have to be that way. And there are churches that accept and love people even if they aren't professing the Christian faith. And I don't even think, and I think that there's a lot of Christians, a lot of priests who would have no problem saying to you that, you share that you guys have different, you have the same beliefs with different language,
Mm.
right?
Well, I mean,
So
similar
it's,
enough, yeah. I'm aware of that, but it's still there's a size of any religion, and I'm not just talking about Christianity here, promotes an aspect of exclusivity. They don't just say, "Oh, we're pretty good," but every
sure,
other religion, it doesn't really matter what religion you believe in. They're all telling you to believe in that specific religion, which, in a sense, promotes division. And I know that's in the end really good
sure.
people
But I
like
think it has a
yourself. We're not.
function.
Yes, but it can be a very destructive function that destroys even the positive that you
Sure.
get from people having this, going back to this notion of catalysts and compounds, of the people just being able to come by these compounds and not have to develop them for themselves. So they come by this ethical framework, this ethical tool, without having to derive it from the ground up. Yeah, that is clearly an argument for religion, right? Although it's not an argument for believing in
But I would argue
yourself,
that you
but
could.
it's
Sure, but I think that there's no good argument for why you can't remove the exclusion. We've reformed Christianity a billion times. It's happened many times, not just from the Reformation. There's been a ton of reformations to the Christian faith.
okay,
We can say
this is
this
okay.
part of the faith.
I
Go
mean,
ahead.
this is a really good segue, but because I'm sure we can both go for a tangent, but this is a really good segue into the last question I had,
Sure.
because this is really a concern, another concern I have, right? I mean, I'm my first name's actually Thomas, and you could say I'm named after Thomas Aquinas or Thomas the Doubter from the Bible. I think the last one's quite apt, actually. That's very much in my character. I just see that even when a religion reforms and is bettered in my eyes, and so let's just say there's an ultimate measure for
Mhm.
this, it can always go backwards. Islam, it happened with Islam. It was much more
Sure.
liberal in some areas of the world, and now it's gone very conservative in some areas of the world. And I'm seeing the same thing in the United States. And these people who are Christian in America, in the impression I get as a European, is that a lot of them, their parents and their grandparents would have been of the Protestant faith. They wouldn't have been
Yeah.
necessarily so extreme in the way that it's allowed and enabled, and it's made nationalism easier in a sense by using their faith as a vessel to manipulate them. Please tell me I'm wrong, and give me a broader context and understanding of being a Christian in America today.
I mean, no, I mean, for a little while, I went to one of those churches. Not like because I agree with them necessarily. It was just a church that we went to for a while, and we thought we might try it and see. This is before a lot of kind of what you're seeing nowadays. This is about 20 years ago. And it was interesting to go to that church for a while because I got a really good look on the inside of a lot of the church of how those kinds of churches operate and work. And yeah, it's really bad. I don't like it. And you're right that we can go backwards. But I think that the issue, and I think we're seeing this with the U.S. government, and we're seeing this with the Christian faith. I think we're seeing this in a lot of areas, a lot of our institutions and stuff, is that people want there to be some version of an institution that you can create. It works on its own. You just put people into it to do the internal workings, and then good stuff comes out. And just like every other thing in your life, it takes maintenance. One of the like worst parts about becoming an adult, in my opinion, is learning how much maintenance everything in your life has: your body, your clothes, your car, where you live, your job, your relationships. It's all ongoing input. You have to always be engaged, you have to always be working on these things. And if you want to fight fascism, you cannot assume it's gone and say, well, we've already fixed it and we're good. You have to be on watch for it. If you want to fight racism, if you want to fight any kind of bigotry, it's that way. If you want to have a strong faith that represents the values that you care about, you have to be on watch. I think the Bible talks a lot about this, but it's very important that you are intentional in your actions and that you understand the actions of the people around you. And so whenever I see people using Christianity in a way that I disagree with,
Mm.
I have no problem saying that I disagree with it. I have no problem saying that I don't agree with that. I don't partake in my kind of faith like that, and I can talk about how the people that are believing it are being harmed by it and things like that. And so I think that it's a tool that people can use poorly or use intentionally to hurt people, but it's an institution, and institutions have to be upheld by that constant maintenance. You have to be on your toes. You have to watch for bad intentions. You have to watch for, subversive movements and things like that. And unfortunately, I think that the Christian faith in America is suffering from that. I think that it's unfortunate that Christianity is being so easily used against people. And it's not the first time. It's not the first time in America it's been done that way. And so, yeah, I mean, it is. I very much regret it, but I think that also there are parts of the Christian faith that aren't like that in America.
For sure. I
My
mean,
own church
yeah, yeah.
for a long time. I was like, I gotta shout out my church. For a long time, the Episcopal Church in America worked really hard with the U.S. government directly
Mm.
to help settle and integrate refugees. Refugees that came to America, a lot of them would go through the Episcopalian Church to try and integrate into society, to become, good American citizens, or at least good contributors to the American project. And then in this administration, when Donald Trump said they were going to start bringing over South Africans, the Episcopalian Church said, no, we're not going to do that. And they broke ties.
Mm.
Okay. And that's the important thing that we need to see, is that our church leaders are actually leaders. They take a stand for our rights. They take a stand for the morals in the Bible, and they do not let those subversive pressures from the outside or from within to kind of corrupt what is supposed to be a good thing. And so, like, as an individual Christian in America, it is very tough. It is very tough to see Andrew Wilsons of the world, or JD Vance and things like that
Mm.
out here, in my opinion, very clearly acting in ways that are harmful, that are not loving, that I cannot find support for in the Bible or in Christian teachings, and have these people try to put themselves as the face of Christianity in certain ways, and it's very frustrating. But again, this kind of stuff is talked about in the Bible. The structure for how you should respond, how you should act, how you should carry yourself is in there,
Mm.
in my opinion. And uh, for a lot of it, it's about for me, it's about taking part in my church, it's about taking part in my community, and making sure that whenever I'm online, I have no problem saying I'm a Christian. And a big thing for me, as part of being a Christian, is that I want to be a Christian that people know, and people can say, "Oh, I do know a Christian that I like." Right? Not in the sense that, like, I'm everybody's friend, but I
Mm-hmm.
think that a lot of people have incredibly negative interactions with Christians, and I think that people, especially now with the public people I talked about, it's very easy for them to say, "Oh, I don't like Christians because I don't like J.D. Vance, or I don't like Andrew Wilson, or I
Well,
don't like these
I
things."
invite you to Europe and to see
Right.
the Christian churches here. I mean, I know there are many good Christians, but my fear is, and I think because I've had conversations about if I'd had children, whether they'd be brought up in a Christian church or go to Saturday school, I think it is in Germany, and I worry that just because the Christians that I know now and they'll be surrounded by a moderate, that even from that it can go backwards. And part of the reason that I worry about that is going back to the this compound discussion, right? If you don't learn to develop your own compound, then you're kind of prone to seeing when it starts to fail. And certainly every religion, for its own sake of its own survival, is a little bit exclusive, right? In the sense of saying, well, this is the right religion to go for. This is the right set of frameworks. These books aren't identical religious scripture, right? There's a difference between the Bhagavad Gita and the Bible. So in that sense, it kind of has the seeds to be the basis for authoritarianism, for separation, for a supremacist mindset. Not to say that it always will go that
Sure.
way, or even necessarily that it often will, but when it does, it can go really, really badly, and people
Yeah.
don't necessarily think for themselves of looking for coherence. And in some respects, especially if they're more of a literist interpretation of the Bible, they've been taught to accept contradictions, which means that they can accept contradictions elsewhere in their life. And so there's a real risk, certainly with the kind of the set that you get with Christianity today, being the Bible basically and a church, that there's an easy disposition to kind of go towards a supremacist nationalist mindset, and you don't have the tools to rationally think through problems necessarily, because you've got used to using.
I agree with you, and I don't think that I disagree with much of what you said here. And I think that is a reason to be concerned about religion. It's why I'm proud of my country before this administration for how important separation of church and state was. I personally advocate for more regulation on religion in America. I advocate for less tax exempt status for religion in America. I have actually a lot of very strong opinions about how I think that religion is far too deregulated in America. I think there's a lot of laws that should be applied to religion that aren't. I think it's a thing where everything you said is right. And, to me right now, the response is not get rid of religion. The response is use the tools we have to address those issues. I don't think I'm at a point yet where we need to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think we have a lot of other tools that can be put into place to make sure those problems that you brought up, if not addressed, are at least abated such that I'm not going to worry that it's going to totally destabilize society, right? And I think that those things are possible. I just think that it's a very scary thing to do because of how bad it can go. But ignoring it and not doing anything is not going to work, right?
Okay,
Because now the alternative. One second. The alternative to what I'm suggesting, right, is not that we get rid of religion. It's that we keep not addressing the issue of religion. To me, addressing the issue of religion is not getting rid of religion. It's using the tools we have to address the problems that come from religion, as we do in every other aspect of our lives. And I don't think that I would ever disagree that we should do things like that.
Well, hey, I mean, I'm not advocating for the complete destruction. Even if it was possible, I can't even imagine it would be possible. You'd just get a backlash.
Sure.
You'd get complete chaos and disorder. It's a bit like communists wanting to get rid of capitalism. What comes with that is that absolute destruction, sadness, and nothing really that good. So I'm not advocating for getting rid of religion. It's just a question of whether I think religion should be encouraged. And I mean, in that sense, you talk about kind of reformation or change, maybe in American society or globally. Do you not think that it's maybe the responsibility of a number of churches in America, or perhaps some churches need to be held to a higher esteem about how they practice Christianity, and how the exclusivity of how that Christianity is preached? Because it's a bit illiberal in some forms, right? In terms of preaching that you must believe in this, and everyone's a sinner if you don't believe in it, in a black and white sense. That's kind of against our liberal values as liberal democracies. So maybe those churches should be expected to change in that regard. But I don't know how you would implement that.
I would just say this, that like one thing is that like while you're right, and I think it is on churches to make that change, I think that what you'll find though is that those very extreme, very exclusionary forms of Christianity, for the most part, are on the downturn pretty severely, right? In America, we are becoming more secular generally, but those very, prominent ones that you see right now, these very evangelical, these very nationalist ones, they are not exploding in growth in America. More and more people are leaving those churches, not even just leaving them to be atheists, leaving them for other forms of Christianity that are not like that. So like, and I think that is what is pushing them to become more extreme, is that they see their own death, and so they're trying to rip it back by going backwards, in the same way that the fascist movements, that's why they kind of coincide so well, is this return to what was good, and we're gonna do it by force. And so I think that's where there's a line, and it's why I think that, like, for me, that's why, like, I would say, like, I agree with you that it's on the churches, and I think that the churches that are not like that, for the most part, are actually staying steady, somewhat growing, in comparison to those very exclusionary style churches, those very, in my opinion, hate-filled ones. They are not showing that growth. They're showing decreases severely. And so it's kind of a thing where it's like they're a bigger problem now than they've ever been, but they're also kind of on death's door, in the sense that, like, if they do not take over and implement like a requirement to adhere to their faith, there's like a generation or two and they're going to basically be irrelevant.
I mean, I hope
And
you,
so
I
and
hope
so
you're
that's the,
right, but I mean, it can come back again. Right? It seems to be. I mean, I'm thinking, for example, of the Mormon
well, but
Church, right? The Mormon Church. I mean, a huge percentage of Mormons vote for Donald Trump. Right? I don't know the exact percentage of
yeah,
my head, but it is a large percentage, and it seems to fit in with this kind of it's a fascistic way of thinking. It's a supremacist way of thinking, right? They clearly
yeah.
consider themselves superior. There is no space for other religions or other forms of Christianity, even. And to be fair to Christianity, of course, there are strands of Islam like this, strands of Judaism, Hinduism. You see Hindu nationalism as well, right? There's genocides going on around the world against Muslim people in Myanmar, right? And that's the Buddhists, for example. So this can happen in every religion and every dogma, right? This doesn't have to be
Right.
even theistic in belief. But it does seem
Well,
that
and
when you have any kind of dogma where you say, we'll just practice these rules, and when people don't develop the rules for themselves, that it's teaching people not to really think critically for themselves and leaves them prone to manipulation.
well, and and I think there's two things on that. First, I think that, and I just immediately said, where they don't develop the rules for themselves. I am very big on that when it comes to Christianity. I think that when people read the Bible, they need to read it, understand it from a foundational level, and build their faith from that foundational level. I have a really hard time talking to people, and this happens a lot when I talk to Christians. It's you are like you're just telling me the most recent sermon you heard, right, or your favorite sermon that you heard. I'm not really engaging with you on something you understand. You're just making the argument that a priest made to you and you
Mhm.
thought sounded good, right? And so like I agree. I think that if someone has a religion and they're going to live based on that religion, they need to have like an incredibly in-depth understanding of why they believe that, what their foundations are, how they like reached the rules by which they live their life. And that's how I try to engage with my
But
religion.
that means
But
questioning their religion almost continuously, right? Because
yes,
to really
yes,
go to the foundation, you have to
yes.
question religion itself. Okay, yeah. So
You should, yes. I think that you cannot be, I don't think you can be a truly faithful religious person without doubt. You have to have an immense amount of doubt
okay, that's interesting.
to
Yeah, because
be a true religious person. I think that you have faith, but that does not exclude you from having doubt,
and
right?
in a sense, it should be perpetual because there's always a space
Yes,
for you being wrong and uncertain. And let me be clear about this. I recognize that in myself. You know, Christianity could be the way, and I could be completely wrong. And I think it's important that everybody, not even if you're just religious, but any of your beliefs, can admit that they could be entirely wrong. But in
but see,
religion,
that's
it seems
go ahead.
difficult sometimes. There are interpretations of just about every religion where you shouldn't question God, and in a sense, you're doing that. And
Well,
so,
and
yeah,
but this cuts to what we were talking about earlier around like this idea of fascism and stuff like that, where it's like when you have a government, you should always have doubt. There should never be a time whenever you are in that you do not doubt that your government could be wrong or could be doing things incorrectly. You should think that about your religion, your government. It doesn't mean that you don't trust them.
mm.
It means that you have a reasonable level of paranoia and doubt such that you can catch problems before they happen, that you can correct problems whenever they arise and you don't just paper over them. There's an incredibly important thing. It's maintenance. It's how you make sure things keep going. And so, for me,
I mean,
yeah, go ahead.
I'm going to quote the Bible to you that I've got all these little quotes that
Sure.
I'm completely reading out of context. But
That's
it
fine.
just shows you the ambiguity and sense of how it can be misread. So from Romans, which is Romans is the New Testament, right? So
Yes.
let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God. In other words, that all authorities that exist because of God. And in a sense, this is
Sure.
discouraging you to question authorities.
No, no, no. It's saying you should be like, no, I don't think it's telling you not to question authorities. I think that, I mean, Christianity itself is a form of rebellion of multiple forms of government at the time. Um, Whenever we're looking at that, right, we're looking at that text and looking at Romans and who he's talking to, you're subject to these authorities and they come from God, right? Okay, well, what do you mean with that? I think that in there, what he's talking about is like, whenever we're talking about the authorities here, we're talking about breaking the law. We're talking about whether or not you should adhere to the laws of the land that you live in.
Mm.
And yes, you should. Now, I don't think that that then would say if there's an unjust law or if there's a law that cuts against your morals, you should subject yourself to that law. I don't read that in there, right? It's kind of the would you steal
It
bread
doesn't
to
sound
feed your
very
family?
ambiguous, does it? I mean, my point is not to
No,
say that there is a better interpretation of this, but it's a I mean, forgive me for saying this, for all that I've read of the Bible, and I haven't read it from front to back, barely that at all.
I don't recommend it. It's not a great thing to read.
I give it probably like a C- as a philosophy book, and that's maybe a little bit kind. Although I'm pretty negative with my grading of philosophy books in general, so let's keep it in context. But sentences like this are so ambiguous. It reminds me actually of Sartre and other existentialist philosophers, where you can interpret what a lot of they say in so many different ways, and that leaves people to being manipulated, right? Because if you can shape it in any way that's
well, this is like that sentence that you just read was not written except to be read by a specific group of people. It was then preserved and then later turned into a religious text. The person that wrote that didn't write that.
I'm not blaming the person that wrote that.
One second, no. But here's the deal. You're saying it can be interpreted in so many different ways. Maybe you're right. It can, except I don't know why I'm putting that level of like the level of like importance that you're putting on this text, this line. I'm not sure where that's coming from. I'm not sure why you're saying I need to read this literally, or I need to. I'm not saying you should. Well, this is unambiguous.
I'm saying you can. I'm saying people can be guided towards these sentences, these little snapshots of the Bible, and the Bible allows itself, in terms of the ambiguity, to be read in multiple ways.
I'm gonna quote Stephen Bennell that I don't live my life in 30-second clips, and the Bible wasn't written in one sentence fragments. Right. And it's to me, it's why I do not quote specific lines of the Bible. I will talk about entire books of the Bible or maybe sections of a book of a Bible, but I don't talk about quotes. I don't talk about verses of the Bible. I don't think it's an appropriate way to engage with the text. I don't think it's a very healthy way to engage with the text. I think that it is, by doing so, you are undermining your ability to engage with God and the Bible and the things that you can learn from it.
I'm not saying how you interpret it. I'm just saying that the Bible, for the modern context, could be written in a better, updated way, which leaves a bit less ambiguity for example, of when to question or not to question authority. Because I think there's space to go in both directions, right? We know historically you should definitely have questioned authority, and then a lot of the times it's good to accept authority, and it allows cohesion in society. So, I mean,
but I'm advocating whenever you read that verse to me, not to. You're saying it can be read ambiguously. I'm saying yes, it can. But that's not the end of the sentence. The end of the sentence is then, and so you should look at lectures. You should go read the historical context. You should understand the language that was being used. You should understand the ideas of the time and how that's being implemented by the people who wrote it and who they wrote to it. Because when you do all of those things, it can still be somewhat ambiguous, but it makes it so that it's far less ambiguous than what it is before. It's like if someone opened up
I entirely agree.
If you open a physics book and it goes, well, this element is radioactive, and a person goes like, what the fuck does that mean? What the fuck does it mean to be radioactive?
That's a bad analogy.
Data particles, gamma. What's the half-life?
That's a bad analogy. All the words here, most people can have it's not like there's a word here that's ambiguous in itself or that people won't have an understanding of. All the words here from previous contexts, a lot of people will have. They'll be able to understand the meaning of that sentence, and maybe the sentences around it will also reinforce this point. Right, but then if you read the overall Bible, and we both admit there are contradictions, it's about resolving those and the overall interpretation. And as we both agree, the people that were writing these lines, they were not thinking, "Oh, there's going to be a Bible read in the 21st century." So I'm not insulting or being critical of the original people that write it, but the notion that we perpetuate the Bible, and if you're a Christian, it's quite understandable that you would think, well, the Bible is the supreme scripture here. And if you don't think that, then it's kind of moving away from being influenced by Christianity but not being quite Christian. And so to me that seems paradoxical. But
that's a textual central. That's like a textual essentialism that I don't partake in. I think that the New Testament is pretty explicit that you should not hold religious texts as the central aspect of your religion.
But that's paradoxical. How can I put so much faith in that text that's telling me it's a tautology, right? It's self-referential.
How much faith am I putting in? I'm putting my faith in God, not in the text.
Okay, but then you don't need the text at all. Then throw the text away and look at.
I don't think you need the text. Yes, that was part of the earlier conversation. Is that I'm saying I don't think that God, if a person met, I mean, there's people in the Bible that never interacted with the Jewish or Christian religion who were close to God. There's a man named Melchizedek. Okay, there's a priest king named Melchizedek in the Old Testament who it is a true puzzle to Jews and Christians alike who this guy fucking was. But the Bible goes, oh, he knew God. They were super close. He was like a priest in a totally different like form than we know about, but he was close with God. So like there are people that exist in there that did not have a connection with the religious text or the religious traditions of Jews or Christians that were close to God. So it's not like it's not a contradiction for me to say that the Bible tells me that I do not need the Bible to be close to God. I mean, it's part of the faith.
Well, it does remind me of a paradox that Russell was a little bit disconcerted with at the beginning of the 20th century. But in the end, that brings you somewhat closer to my own beliefs, because then there's a lot of pragmatism in that. I think our bigger difference in the sense then is more the theistic belief about how our relationship, or if there is a relationship with God. And it still doesn't, in the end, I mean, we will never know. This is the difficulty of studying history, right? To compare and contrast when something does or doesn't happen, like we do in the scientific method, is very, very difficult in historical context. So who knows where the US would be right now if Christianity didn't exist? Okay, we could see the negatives here, but perhaps there's a lot of good, as you're implicating, from Christianity that also wouldn't have existed, and many good things in the US wouldn't exist. And I'm not going to be arrogant enough to say that I think the bad outweighs the good, even in modern US context. Yeah, in the end, I think it's so open to interpretation that it becomes, it's no longer a single doctrine, right?
Well, no, but like it's this thing where it's like, I think that again, I think that the things that were written to specific people, but the way that the Bible was formulated and taught and things like that was intentionally ambiguous in a lot of places, because there are core ideas, and they're saying here are these core ideas, and you can apply them as you see fit, right, within this religion. And I hear you where you're saying like you and I are approaching very similar places, and I think that makes a lot of sense. I think it makes sense that a society that we live in is heavily influenced by the last 2,000 years of Christianity. And I think that
we have a lot to be grateful
lessons
for
of
sure.
but I think the lessons of Christianity, for the most part, have largely been extracted in a lot of ways so that you can use them without needing faith in the Christian God to get there. I think that our society has done a good job of doing that, where you can enjoy a lot of the benefits of Christianity without being a Christian, right? Whether that is, because we have tools to get there without the catalyst that we need, or just because maybe we live in a society that doesn't have the problems that Christianity used to need to solve. That being said, that's why for me, if people don't want to be Christian, I don't look down on them and I don't judge them, because I think that God was trying to give us those gifts. I think that's what I was talking about before, where God clearly wanted to give us some kind of path to get to the things that you can derive from Christianity that are positive. And if humans find a way to get those things without the need for Christianity, I don't know how that's a negative thing to God. I think that a lot of people say that God really wants to have a personal relationship with us. I'm not so sure about that. It seems more like God wants us to have these specific ethical tools and tools in our life to be able to live better lives from his point of view. And whether that is through like directly getting it from him and his son through the Bible, or whether that's because we've now extracted that and created a society that comes from it that lets us do that, I don't see why he would be unhappy with either one of those things, right?
I mean, I think actually this is now our biggest difference. So we talk about some similarities, but this notion, I mean, I have this notion of theoretically of God being equivalent to nature, but in that sense, I'm quite confident that God is not trying to do or not do anything, and frankly, in terms of a human notion of caring, does not care about us. And so we clearly differ in our views there. And the shape of God that you seem to see, I don't see where that in the theory comes from, because to be so confident in this notion of a God that's guiding in any respect, rather than just, it's a bit like
you've asked me a lot of questions. I'm gonna ask you this.
Okay.
So then so you understand how I think you have a pretty good understanding of my engagement with religion and the Bible and stuff like that. what do you view the Bible as? What is the Bible? Like why like as far as like its creation, not saying like is it a religious text? I mean like if you look
Mhm.
back in history and you see like okay, these guys wrote the Bible and it created this big religion, like you just view that as just like a thing that happened. These guys just made it up. Whether it was not in a derogatory sense, but they were part of a bunch of traditions. They were learning about different philosophies, and they got
Mhm.
and at different points they wrote texts that came together to become the Bible. So you just think it's just kind of a thing that just kind of happened in the past, right?
Evolved, right? I mean,
Right.
these are
Sure.
experiences people have
Sure.
had, and even then, we don't even know, of course, that what the people actually said and what they wanted to people to have heard them say are maybe two different things.
Sure.
And so, and then of course, it's been shaped over time also by the early Catholic Church. You know, that there's
Of
theories
course.
that there are that the Gospels that are missing from the Bible currently. So then again, it's been shaped by, frankly, political interests.
Uh-huh.
You know, that's what my grandfather was studying, right? Was the relationship between the Catholic Church and politics. So it's many things. That's what it is historically, but then there's what it is in terms of how it's used and how it's an influence on people, and that's
Well,
also
sure. And
multiple different things. Clearly,
so, but within all of that, okay, I don't really disagree with a lot of what you said, but I don't see how any of it is contradictory to what my faith is or my belief in God or all those things. And so it's kind of a situation where like whenever I get challenged on a lot of this,
mm,
a lot of people are like, well, your God is so amorphous or you know, he's so it's like the invisible gardener or whatever, things like that. And it's like, yeah, no, that's kind of what the Bible tells us is that that's how it is, and that's what history tells us is that it's really not about God, it's about us, and it's about us doing better. And so like to me, if none of the events of the Bible happened, okay, but we still got the Bible out like out of history and we now have the Bible, right? To me, that wouldn't even really disprove that God doesn't exist or something, or even the Christian God, right? It's kind of a thing where it's just like I think that the Bible that came out of those events and whatever happened is what God wanted to occur to help society develop into a certain way. And it's a thing where like a lot of people then are like, well, how can you know? How can you prove it? How do you have it? And it's just like, no. It- I would not believe proof of God. If there was proof of God, it would make me not believe in God anymore, as I understand
the
it.
irony.
Right? I can't.
That's a
Which is
rebellious streak.
right,
Uh,
but it's the because the whole point of it is that it's not about him and it's not about like access to him and those kind of things. It's about him wanting things better for us. And so, this kind of search for proof, this kind of search for thing gets away from what the intention of the Bible is and what the intention I believe of what God is. I don't think God's intention is to leave a cookie crumb trail of clues that we can get to him and finally go, oh, here's the proof to him. I do not think that is the point.
it was the physicist Dirac, if I remember correctly. I know it's physics better than it's philosophy, but I think he was the one who insinuated, um, was it Pauli? Um, he insinuated, at least a very gifted physicist who was a founding father of quantum mechanics, insinuated that it would be a question of calculating the probability of God and or the probability of humans existing, and if it was so unlikely to exist, then it must have been by some guiding force. And so that was how he framed it. And in that sense, if that was possible to calculate and consider, that could be considered evidence, because there's never going to be concretely, oh, God must exist or doesn't exist. It could also be, a fuzzy logic approach of more likely or less likely. And I
Well,
do
but
actually think there are arguments going as a physicist going in that direction. And I'd find it kind of sad if I'd come to you, go, hey, actually the God you described, it looks pretty close to being likely, and you say, damn it, I'm not going to believe it anymore because of that. I think
well,
I don't think you would actually have that reaction. I think it wouldn't contradict your sense of God that you have now.
sure. But it's just such a to me it's like it's kind of a thing. It's like I had a big argument with Destiny about the concept of qualia, right?
Hmm.
And I think it's a very silly concept. Only because people are like, "Oh, you can't um like you can't what is it? You can't describe a qualia to somebody such that they would be able to experience the qualia, right?"
Almost by
And to me
definition,
it's
yeah.
yes, exactly. And it's kind of a word game in the sense where it's like, yeah, guess what? I can never tell somebody what something tastes like
Mm-hmm.
because you have to use taste to understand taste. I
Mm-hmm.
can compare things. And it's very funny because it's like, to me, I feel like there's some kind of profound thing within this idea that you can't share a quality with other person, and I don't understand that profoundness. I don't see it in there. It feels just like I'm dealing with a word game. It's like whenever someone says, "Well, can God create a stone so large that he can't lift it?" And it's like, I appreciate the fact that you are able to do word games with me, but I don't know how that at all affects my engagement with what I'm doing here, right? And so like whenever it's this idea of like, oh, we could finally prove that God exists, blah 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 blah, all these things, it's so far removed from my engagement with it that it doesn't really matter to me. It's like, well, what if he didn't exist? It's like, well, what if he didn't? If I died and there was no God, right? It's not like I would be like disappointed. It's not like I'd be like, oh no. One, I'd be dead, so it doesn't matter. But like, let's say I die and it's a different God. Let's say I
Oh,
die and Allah is there, and I'm like,
f-
no, I got it wrong,
forgive me
right?
for
Oh,
there are philosophers that consider it this way, that it's better to believe in God because if you
the experiences that I have, and it's led me to believe these things. If I showed up and God said, "You got it all wrong, and so you're going to hell," again, I would go, "Okay, like, I mean, fair enough. Like, okay, that's how it goes." I can't sit here and like it's an unknowable thing. So worrying about an unknowable thing doesn't make sense for me to like try to then like game it or get into it. It's like, no, let me just take the tools that I have, apply it in the way that I think is best for my life, and I'm gonna live with it. I mean, and also if I showed up and God said to me, well, you did everything right, but actually it is a sin to be gay, and you accepting gay people means that you can't go into heaven, I would say, okay, cool, I don't want to go in there. I don't agree with this shit. I think that that's wrong. And I have no problem saying that, right?
okay,
Like it's
that's
that.
also a little bit like my own beliefs in the sense that I believe humanity can create good. We create it,
Sure.
and we're responsible for it. And that's another thing I find a little sad is when the Christian says, "Oh, I have to thank God for all the good I've done." And it's like, no, you worked really hard, and you put your life on
Well,
line, all these things, and then
but
people
see,
don't take
1 second.
responsibility for it. Yeah, sorry.
A
Yeah.
lot, I deal with this with a lot of people where they're like get upset about that. That to me, someone saying, I have to thank God for this. I understand why it's frustrating to hear that as
Mm.
a non-believer. But to me, I view that as creating a way for people to have humility who wouldn't have it otherwise. Thanking God allows people to have humility. There's these people in Africa called the Bushmen, a very interesting cultural group. And whenever one of their men, especially young men, come back with a very large kill, with a very awesome, super cool kill, right? Everybody in the tribe talks shit. This is bad. This doesn't taste good at all, man. This is some shit. Like this meat isn't that good. Actually, it seems probably lame. Probably didn't even get that good of a shot. And it's super common.
Hmm.
Everybody does it. There was a white man that visited them. He bought them a cow and gave it to them, and they did the same thing to him. And he kind of upset, didn't really get it. And then someone pulled him aside. He's like, you know why they do that? It's because they cannot let their young men get prideful, and they view this as a practice to make sure that these young men stay humble, right? It's this cultural practice that enforces humility, that makes people feel humble even if they don't know how to intentionally express humility. It makes it so that that is their natural reaction. And I think that like thanking God is a similar thing. Thanking God isn't saying that I didn't do something and I don't deserve the credit. It's saying maybe I did this and I deserve credit, but I'm going to be humble and I'm not going to, get super prideful. I'm not going to, lord it over people. I'm going to say, praise God. He helped me do this. I'm super happy about it. And it lets them accept the praise without becoming prideful and things like that. Sorry, that's just a little pet peeve of mine whenever people
No,
get
no.
worried about
Actually, you
thanking
can go
God.
to even a greater extreme in that trajectory by saying,
Sure.
if you're a determinist, right, then you are absolutely not responsible for anything that you do because you're inevitably going to
Yeah.
do it. So
That's bullshit.
and that, well, I don't know if it is. I'm this is one of the reasons
Oh, I'm sorry. In the Christian, in my understanding of the Christian faith, that is bullshit.
Oh,
Sorry. Go ahead.
I'm not saying the Christian faith. I'm saying in my own
Yeah, yeah,
beliefs.
yeah, yeah. Yeah. No, dude, you're on place. Sorry, I was just speaking
I'm
from my
free. I'm
own
free to
perspective.
believe in determinism, even if you're not.
We'll see about that.
But so in that sense, okay, sometimes you can just say, well, I was inevitably going to do that. But I also think you don't need a God to be humble in the sense of thinking, oh, how lucky I am to have the things that I had. I try and practice that. It's good for
Sure.
your peace of mind. But again, I mean, you don't need a God to thank to be grateful for the luck that you've had and to appreciate a notion of, to be frank, luck as
No,
opposed
of
to
course not.
the influence of God. But
Well, but here, I'm going to give you something. In the 1500s and earlier, in the year 1000, people didn't really know how to consistently count time. Okay, it's a very difficult thing for people to conceptualize and do. So what they would do is they would say prayers. Okay, say this many, fucking whatever the prayers are that they would say, Lord's Prayer. So I put this, I put a, I put I heated up this oven and I need to put some bread in to cook it. If I can keep my hand in the oven for the entire Lord's Prayer, then that means it's not hot enough, right? You don't need the Lord's Prayer. You don't need to be a Christian to know the Lord's Prayer to know if an oven's hot or not. Those are just the tools you have. And for a lot of people, they are not going to be given the emotional and intelligence and the mental tools to reach humility without that, or at least they wouldn't do it.
I know this goes back. This goes back. Yeah, this goes back to your compound analogy. I think it was a really good analogy.
Sure.
So I mean, you're rehashing that argument, and I do agree.
Yeah,
I think it's one of the better arguments for, and a number of philosophers who are effectively agnostic said, well, it's quite useful for being a shortcut to teaching ethics. But I mean, just as a finishing point here, because I think this is
sure.
We've kind of rounded a lot of these points off. But this in itself, I also think has played some role. How much of a role is to be seen? And I'm saying this in a very arrogant perspective because I've never been to the United States. I have been to Mexico for a while, but that's something else.
You got to come over and visit.
Yeah, exactly. I've got it, and I hear the meat's good in Texas. So,
oh yeah,
nice juicy steak would be good. But I do think it's left people prone when they haven't learned the method of argumentation, of breaking down arguments, of building up for themselves the notion of ethics that they really believe in because they've found the understanding of it. That when it's just from a scripture and they're told, and a lot of people frankly do say, well, the Bible is the book. You can't go against the Bible, right? That is one way in which Christianity is taught or interpreted. And that leaves people very, very prone to manipulation, especially because just look at the examples we've given here of how it can be interpreted, right? Of your interpretation and how that contrasts with how other people are believing in it. And so a book that can be believed in so many different ways leaves people to be shaped to believe in one of those particular ways when it's seen fit or useful, by an organization, by a movement. And I do feel that has played a role in the MAGA movement in the United States, basically hijacking Christianity. But it was predictable to some extent, sadly.
Yeah, I meant to make this point earlier and I forgot to, and I think actually this is also a good way to bookend it. This conversation with something is, I think that you're very, very dead on with a lot of that critique, and I think that for me, whenever I'm looking at and thinking about these things that you say, I think there is a huge amount of accountability to religious people as far as those things. So, I am not an apologist when it comes to, say, like the Crusades or things like that. Like I don't mince words on those kind of things. And I don't think it's appropriate to. But I think it's whenever I look at modern movements and stuff like that, whenever the points you point out, I think that the issue is that Christians are not putting enough emphasis on that second step. Okay, great. You got these tools that you don't understand, maybe, but you can use them to your benefit. And there's these, texts and beliefs and things. You need to now take the next step, and you need to become educated in ways of interpretation, of understanding, and these things. And I don't think there's enough of an emphasis for people to have it. And I think it's something where a lot of people might get upset. Where like, well, why do I need to keep educating myself and stuff like that? And I think that, a person that has a true faith in Christianity and love for God would never shy away from the idea of learning more and more about their religion and learning more and more about their faith, such that they can stand alone in their faith, that they can have that foundation. And I think that that's on us. It's a failing of Christians in America that we have not pushed that enough, and it's a failing that Christians are not pushing that in their own communities. I am very big on that in my church. I very much, whenever I'm at Bible study, I rail against a lot of things, and I have a lot of very strong opinions, and I push people to learn those things. And so you're right in that, I think religion does lend itself down that road. But I think a large part of it is because people think, now that I believe, the work that I'm doing is done and I don't need to do any more, when in reality, believing is kind of the first step. And there is so much more that you need to do, in my opinion, to really have a fulfilling and a, frankly, safe religious faith that's not going to leave you prone to manipulation or to, things that are harmful. And so I think that for me, it's kind of a like, and I think you would agree with this, where it's like, you look at religion and it can be used for a bad thing, but the reason that it's being used for a bad thing isn't because it's religion, it's because the people doing that for whatever reason, either weren't given the tools to use it correctly or have motivations to use it incorrectly, or they understand it. And even though they understand it, they would rather use it improperly for themselves. And I'm more personally more interested in addressing those issues than kind of saying that we need to do something about religion, because I think
Mm.
if tomorrow we woke up and religion was gone, and you would agree with this, it would not solve the problem of those people using it improperly. As you said earlier, ideologies and other things can be used that
Yeah, yeah,
way
for sure, for
with or
sure.
without religion. So
Yeah.
it's kind of a thing to me where it's like, um, to me, whenever you point out these ambiguous phrases, yes, they can be used improperly, and it is on Christians to make sure that other Christians do not do that. I think it is like my responsibility as a Christian. Whenever I talk to other Christians and they have interpretations that I think are dangerous or incorrect, I have no problem confronting them about them and saying, like, I'm not sure I understand that or how you got there.
Mm.
Let's talk about it. I think I appreciate that so many secularists and non-Christians are interested in the addressing issues with Christianity, and I'm happy that they're there putting that pressure on. But I think that a lot of Christians need to look at that and not go, well, now we need to put the walls up and we need to make sure that these fucking dirty atheists stay out. It's saying, oh, okay, our faith is impacting these people negatively. Why is it? It shouldn't be
Mm.
doing that. Me being a Christian should not impact another person negatively. That should not happen, right? In the sense that, like, they should be living their lives. I should not be coming into their lives and negatively impacting them. And if that's happening because of my faith, I need to re-examine my actions, faith, and beliefs, because that is not acceptable. And more Christians need to understand that, and recognize that and reconcile that fact with their faith. So that's kind of where it's coming. Where it's like, I don't disagree with you, and I think that, I'm big on reforms for religion. I'm big on government intervention in a lot of religious things. However, I think that it's not the surface level, but it's still not getting to the root of the problem that we really need to address.
Yeah, I slightly disagree in a sense, and I'm not concretely believing this. This is my point about the study of history and comparing and contrasting. But I think religion allows bad actors, or can allow, or ideologies in general can allow bad actors to hijack them and manipulate them. And Christianity, sadly, part of Christianity seems to have gone that way in the US. But
Yeah.
given in that those broad interpretations, there's clearly the interpretation that you're adhering to, that, if you don't mind me saying, I would call a liberal, humble Christianity, in the sense of recognizing other people's right to believe, and possibly that they might be right over the way you're believing, but this is what's right for you mentality. And I think this goes back to the birth of liberalism in our democracy. I think this is the form of Christianity that allowed for liberalism to develop, because of course liberalism developed under Christianity. And so it exemplifies that there is a way, even if not always, of practicing Christianity can lead that way, and a
Right.
pretty rational approach, in my opinion. Although it's not quite, I hope I don't sadden you, but I'm not entirely, or not converted whatsoever, if I'm honest with you, by this conversation. But
That's
I do
fine.
feel an empathy with you in the sense of, and this is what I was trying to get to with this priest, right, in this journey through Belgium. That I don't think our differences are all that meaningful in a day-to-day life, and I think we should focus more on what we share. And myself as effectively an agnostic, and yourself as a Christian, that we can still hold and believe in the same ethics effectively, despite not having the same theistic notions. So thank you ever so much for coming on the stream. I mean, it's been over 2 hours, and we said it would
Yeah,
be
no,
an
but it's so
hour.
much fun to talk.
And
That's all right.
it's also a nice way to get to know you a little bit better as well, in terms of, because these things matter to me, and I think and I don't want to be dishonest with you in the sense of my skepticism. And the skepticism remains. I think you understand my skepticism as much as I understand your Christianity now. But it's not it's more of a compliment than an insult, rather than being
For
to
sure.
humor you and
And
pretend that I think everything is fine and dandy. But at the same time, yeah, the way you describe your beliefs is what I was hoping for, in the sense of,
that's
so that's
good.
something I can admire and appreciate. And I'm grateful for your influence on your community, and for the existence of your community, and hopefully it will flourish. Um,
Well, and in a reciprocating way, like, I super appreciate one coming on, obviously, and get to talk about this. I really enjoy the discussion on it, and it's something where, like, for me, I think that having secular people like yourself being able to engage with Christians, have these conversations, and not and you being able to challenge my beliefs, and me not getting offended or, coming back at you hard, and you being able to tell me your doubts and things like that
Mm.
are great. Because one thing that I appreciate about this talk is that I don't think, even though you clip chimped the Bible at me, I don't think that there were a lot of that you were trying to gotcha me or trying to like push me, and but to be fair, also like a lot of these, the contradictions in the Bible for me are things that are to be studied,
Mm.
because it's also, I'm going to be honest, if the Bible didn't have that stuff, it would be far less interesting, and I probably wouldn't engage with it as much. There's nothing more fun for me whenever I hear a line or a verse that someone says in the Bible and I don't remember it and I don't know the context of it. I'm like, that sounds insane. Like in
So,
the
so
Destiny's
it's about
tour, he
it's
talked
about
to a guy that said like, yeah, go ahead.
it's about going viral. So maybe this week we should introduce this into our streams a bit more of saying
Yeah,
contradictory and alarmist and crazy things. I mean, it seems to,
right,
Hassan seems to do well doing that. So maybe we need to start doing that.
right,
So, and then maybe that started with the Bible, being a bit out there and saying a few
right.
wild things before, kind of pulling it back a few sentences later so that they could say, hey, you're just reading me out of context.
Yeah, come on, guys.
So
You gotta watch the whole clip.
I'm sorry, Bible writers, for chimping you today. But yeah, and I know I was doing that. But I also think a lot of people, Christians, do that and don't understand
And
the ambiguities
And
of
I
this.
actually, I actually really enjoy it when people do that because it gives me something to go study. Like in Destiny's debate, he did at one of the points in person. He was asking some guy, and he said, "Well, one point Jesus said to go buy a sword. He said Jesus said to go buy a sword. You should go buy a sword. You should sell your cloak and buy a sword." He like said that multiple times. And I was like, man, I really don't remember that. And so I looked it up, and it's like it's really funny because it's not a part of like some big story or big like speech or something. It's like right after the Last Supper, Jesus is talking to his disciples, like, "Hey, just so you know, shit's about to get real rough for y'all. It's gonna be really hard on y'all because I'm about to die and everybody's gonna hate you. So just so you know, you should probably sell your cloak and buy a sword because it's gonna get rough." And it's like, it's just extremely pragmatic and straightforward advice, and to read so much into it like that guy was doing is just really funny to me because I was like ready to be like, what's the message here? It's like this seems pretty explicit. Like I'm not sure. Like if anything, it might just show that Jesus like understands and accepts the concept of like, you know, personal protection. Outside of that, it's really hard for me to like interpret a lot. Right?
I mean, just a finishing point, then, Kafka. That it sounds like this could be something that happens to the Democrats soon. Like if their final leader falls, come on, Dems, you're going to have to get your swords ready because things are about to get really bad. It sounds like
Oh yeah.
could be some echoes of the past going on here.
Right.
Yeah, thanks again for having you on. And
Of course.
yeah, I mean, we'll have to do it again. I mean, there's a few other issues we could discuss, and also the
I love it.
law, and maybe I have to try and intrigue you with some interesting philosophy, and test the waters
I'm,
with you, and make you see that there's more to it than just a bunch of catchy words.
yeah, I'm very interested. I'd love to come back on and do some more talking on it. But of course, everybody go out and read the Pragmatic Papers. That's what
That's
we're
true. That's
really
true.
here
Yeah.
for.
If anyone's somehow listened this far, it's just an impressive stamina, mental stamina, then please read the pragmaticpapers.com. And yeah, we're trying to keep editions at least once a week, and probably more often in the future. And there will be content on our YouTube channel. Don't forget.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
some interviews coming up hopefully on the channel. So yeah, thanks for listening, anyone that's listened, and especially thanks to Kafka for coming on.